Ellen Higginbottom was born in 1998 in Boothstown, a suburb of Salford, just a short drive from Wigan. She was raised by her parents, Mike and Kay, in a loving and supportive home. Ellen is the pride of her family not only because of her accomplishments but also because of her kindness. She was a gifted musician who loved both performing and listening to music, and she had a deep passion for horses and equestrianism. Ellen's love for animals was one of her most defining traits. Since childhood, she has dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, which has motivated her to always work hard in her studies. For her, the passion for animals is not just a hobby but also a purpose in life. While studying psychology at Winstanley College, Ellen hoped to combine her interest in animal behavior with her academic pursuits. Ellen lives with her boyfriend of 2 years, Ryan Warren, who affectionately calls her a gem because of her unique and charming personality. The two dream of a future filled with traveling the world, building a home, and starting a family. However, Ellen had some flaws. She joked about getting lost in parks or forgetting her lines during school plays. Those quirks made people love her even more. It was June 16, 2017, in Wigan, a quiet district in Greater Manchester. The sun is shining, and Orrell Water Park is alive with dog walkers, joggers, and families enjoying the warm afternoon. This nature reserve, with its winding paths and tranquil lake, feels like a haven, a place where nothing bad could ever happen. But on this day, something unthinkable did. That day, Ellen walked through Orrell Water Park, perhaps lost in her thoughts or listening to a favorite song. She had been preparing for her A-levels, focusing on the promising future that lay ahead, but she never returned home. At around 1:43 p.m., she sent a playful Snapchat to her friends, joking that she had been in the park for 20 minutes and was already lost. Her message, laced with her trademark wit, made her friends laugh, as she was always up for a joke. However, as the hours passed, that message ended up being the last anyone would hear from her. By 7:20 p.m., her family grew worried. She wasn't the type of person to disappear without saying a word. Her disappearance was so out of character that her father, Mike, contacted Greater Manchester Police. Something was wrong. Very wrong. As police began their investigation, they turned to those who knew her best, trying to reconstruct her final hours. Did she encounter someone by chance? Could clues lie in her daily habits? Ellen's friends confirmed that she had been at Orrell Water Park earlier that afternoon, with her last known activity being a playful Snapchat sent at 1:43 p.m. The police immediately categorized her disappearance as highly unusual and took urgent action. Orrell Water Park, a 70-acre nature reserve with trails, lakes, and wooded areas, was a local favorite for its tranquility. However, as night fell, the vast area became difficult to search. Based on Ellen's Snapchat activity and reports from friends who had seen her walking in the park after leaving college around 1 p.m., police focused their search there. Meanwhile, her friends turned to social media, sharing emotional messages and pleas for information. By midnight, an extensive search operation was underway. Ground teams and a police helicopter equipped with heat-seeking technology combed the park and its surroundings. The helicopter quickly became a crucial tool in the search, but in an unexpected way. While scanning the area, it detected a heat source, not in the park itself but in an adjacent farmer's field near some marshland. The heat signature revealed a person running away. Could it be Ellen? Had she gotten lost or injured? The helicopter crew guided officers to the location of the heat source. When the search team entered the crop field, they made a shocking discovery. Ellen's body was found in tall grass, lying near a fence and partially clothed. Her lower back and legs were exposed, suggesting a hasty or interrupted situation. Ellen's death was caused by 2 severe and deep wounds, particularly to her neck, either of which would have been fatal. The brutality of the injuries indicated a prolonged attack. Additional defensive wounds on her arms suggested she had tried to fight back. Detective Superintendent Howard Millington led the high-priority investigation to uncover the truth. The wheat field, where Ellen was discovered, revealed disturbing evidence: a spade, a leather belt, and signs of a planned attack. However, her backpack, cell phone, and laptop were missing. This pointed to a calculated perpetrator who may have spent hours, or longer, planning the crime. The police's first task was to piece together Ellen's final movements. She left Winstanley College at around 1 p.m. on June 16 and headed to Oral Water Park. A Snapchat post at 1:43 p.m. confirmed she was there. But what happened in the crucial 20 minutes before the attack, estimated to have occurred around 2 p.m., remained a mystery. The field, located just a short distance from the college, was an isolated area hidden from the park's main paths by dense vegetation. It wasn't a place Ellen would have gone willingly, suggesting she had been lured or forced there. Police cordoned off a large section of the park and set up a forensic tent to protect the scene. As daylight broke, news of Ellen's death spread, prompting local residents to leave flowers at the park's entrance. Investigators turned their attention to the visitors in the park that day, calling for witnesses and asking about anyone who might have been acting suspiciously in recent days. Detective Superintendent Howard Millington, heading the investigation, highlighted a report from June 15, just a day earlier, of 2 women being followed in the park. Could the incidents be connected? Given the state of Ellen's clothing and the nature of the attack, police didn't rule out the possibility of an abuse motive. The community was deeply shaken. Winstanley College urged students to avoid walking near the park alone. Detectives canvassed Wigan, knocking on doors and speaking to anyone who might have seen Ellen. They started with those closest to her. Her boyfriend, Ryan, was one of the first to be questioned, not as a suspect, but to help construct a timeline. Ryan was cooperative, sharing texts and memories of their future plans, which included marriage. Ellen's friends described her as cautious, unlikely to go anywhere with a stranger. Her parents, Mike and Kay, said she had no enemies or conflicts. Ellen was known to be kind and gentle, even saving spiders rather than killing them. These interviews ruled out personal motives and led investigators to believe this was likely a random attack, a chilling and rare occurrence. The park itself became a key focus of the investigation. The police issued an urgent appeal, calling for anyone who had been in the park between noon and 3 p.m. that day to come forward with information. During a press conference, Howard emphasized that even the smallest details could prove crucial. One witness, a retiree walking his dog, recalled seeing a man loitering near the wheat field around 1:30 p.m. A major breakthrough came from the police helicopter deployed during the search. Using heat-seeking technology, it detected a person fleeing the wheat field area at around 2 a.m., just before Ellen's body was found. Officers on the ground were guided to the location, but the figure escaped into the night. The timing of this incident raised suspicions, leading the police to hypothesize that the perpetrator might have returned to the scene to remove or hide evidence but fled upon noticing the helicopter. This prompted a forensic sweep of the field, where investigators discovered DNA on the belt and shovel. This was a significant discovery, as these items did not belong to Ellen, and the DNA did not match anyone she knew. Instead, it was a stranger's DNA, and it was fresh. The marks around Ellen's ankles also appeared to suggest that the belt had been used to drag her from the attack site to the field where her body was discovered. Faced with the new evidence, the police appealed to the community for information, especially regarding Ellen's missing items. This tactic proved successful when a local resident came forward with vital information. This led investigators to a nearby woodland area where a fire had been burning. At the site, among the embers of the dying fire, police found some of Ellen's possessions, including her laptop and keys. They quickly determined that the fire was a clumsy attempt to destroy evidence and conceal the fact that the items had ever been in someone's possession. Following the discovery of Ellen's missing belongings burned in a woodland area, the police made a breakthrough. On Sunday, June 18th, they made the first arrest, a 47-year-old man from Billinga, a suburb of Wigan near the park. His name was David Steele, and he lived on Oakley Avenue, close enough to walk to the crime scene. Witnesses identified him trying to set fire to items in the woods. He was known locally and had a minor criminal record for theft. Neighbors described him as quiet but odd, often seen walking alone at night. Police searched his home and seized clothes and electronics, but he denied any involvement, claiming he had been at home all day Friday. Police subsequently made 2 additional arrests in and around the Oral area. David was charged with handling stolen goods and obstructing justice, along with 2 others, 30-year-old Dean Speakman and 30-year-old Vicky Calland, both from Billing. Who were these 3 suspects, and how were they connected to Ellen's death? As police investigated further, they found no forensic evidence linking the trio to the murder scene. However, The suspects were found in possession of Ellen's stolen laptop and cell phone and had attempted to burn them, despite knowing the items were tied to the murder. How did they obtain the laptop and cell phone? That would soon be addressed. Police received the results of DNA testing from the belt, which changed the course of the investigation. The belt found near Ellen had both Ellen's DNA and the DNA of a man. It matched a man named Mark Buckley. Mark Buckley, a 51-year-old man, lives 20 miles from Wigan. He and his mother lived in a house near the park. However, he was moved to Preston after being convicted of arson in 2016 for setting fire to a neighbor's car. The police arrested Mark and informed him of his rights, saying that he was under arrest on suspicion of murder. They also stated that anything he said may be used as evidence. Mark appeared confused during the arrest and asked for help. The officers reassured him they would secure his property and notified him they had a warrant to search his flat. He was then transported to the station for questioning. When police searched Mark's flat, they discovered a bag containing rope, a ligature, an empty condom packet, and lubricant, items that pointed to a disturbing intent. DNA evidence from the belt and spade linked Mark to the crime. Although the arrest marked a major breakthrough, officers remained cautious in their approach. During questioning, Mark was evasive, admitting he had been in the park but insisting that he had merely found Ellen's belongings. His criminal record revealed past crimes such as arson, theft, and minor offenses in the 1990s, but it showed no history of violent behavior, a detail that perplexed investigators. Senior investigating officer Bob Tong later acknowledged that Mark's record didn't suggest this type of crime, but the evidence told a different story. He stated that the contents of the bag suggested a deliberate attack and that Mark had been there that day with intent. To strengthen their case, police revisited witness statements. A dog walker said he saw a man similar in appearance to Mark, chubby, with a shaved head, carrying a bag, appear near the park entrance around noon. Another witness recounted a disturbing interaction. On Thursday, June 15th, a man had approached her and asked if she often walked alone. Although she initially dismissed the encounter, her description matched Mark. These accounts suggested that Mark had spent days in the park, watching and waiting. Despite the forensic evidence against him, Mark continued to deny any involvement in Ellen's murder. However, the police obtained CCTV footage showing Mark heading toward Oral Water Park shortly after 1 p.m. The footage revealed that he had left home early in the morning, dressed warmly in a thick jacket and trousers, while carrying a green shopping bag. Later, the same camera captured him returning home, this time with the bag appearing full and no longer wearing the coat. He was dressed only in a tank top and shorts. Despite being confronted with this video evidence, he continued to deny any connection to Ellen's murder. Meanwhile, other suspects in custody, David, Dean, and Vicky, began cooperating with the investigation. They admitted to being friends with Mark and revealed how they had come into possession of Ellen's belongings. They explained that Mark had visited them and handed over a backpack containing items stolen from Ellen, including her laptop and keys. He had also sold her cell phone to one of them. Police later uncovered additional CCTV footage showing Mark returning to the park late Friday night, likely intending to move Ellen's body. This plan was interrupted by a police helicopter. The court would later conclude that he intended to bury Ellen under the cover of darkness. These CCTV footage recordings, along with DNA evidence and recovered stolen items, have created a clear picture of guilt, although the police are still investigating the possibility of accomplices. The forensic case against Mark continued to strengthen. Blood stains on his clothes matched Ellen's DNA, and fibers from the rope in his bag were discovered on her body. Investigators ruled out any prior connection between Mark and Ellen. There were no text messages, social media interactions, or mutual acquaintances. There was no evidence to suggest they had ever met. Investigators stated that it was a random attack, although questions remained as to why Ellen was targeted. Further investigation revealed that Mark had interacted with other women in the park that day, none of whom reported being harmed. By June 20th, Mark had been charged with murder and ordered to appear in court, while the other suspects were no longer the focus of the investigation. David, Dean, and Vicky faced lesser charges. As the investigation honed in on Mark, unanswered questions remained. Why had he chosen that day? What compelled a man with no prior history of violence to commit such an act? As police prepared for the trial, they visited Mark in prison, seeking answers. They mentioned that he had an incredible loss of memory when it came to the finer details. With growing evidence against him, Mark eventually confessed. He admitted to killing Ellen and recounted how he greeted her before dragging her off the path. He expressed regret for his actions but consistently denied having any abusive motivations. Ellen's boyfriend, Ryan, expressed his heartbreak online, stating that he would never understand why it had to be her and why it had to happen to them. Mark Buckley's trial began at Manchester Crown Court in September 2017. His guilty plea spared Ellen's family the anguish of enduring a lengthy trial. However, it left many questions unanswered about his motives, causing further pain and confusion. The prosecution, led by Peter Wright and Neil Fryman, presented compelling evidence to argue that the attack was premeditated and motivated by abuse. Fryman stated that Mark had been looking for someone to target that day, emphasizing that he had spent 9 hours in the park searching for a lone woman. The court learned that Mark, armed with a large knife, likely a kitchen knife, attacked Ellen around 2 p.m., dragging her into the bushes off a path. He inflicted multiple neck wounds and strangled her in what judge later described as a savage and brutal act. Prosecutors pointed to the rope and lubricant found in Mark's bag as evidence of his intent to carry out abuse. They believed the assault was never completed because he fled when disturbed. He even returned at 2 a.m. to attempt to bury Ellen's body, but his efforts were thwarted by a police helicopter equipped with heat-detecting technology. Mark's legal defense faced significant limitations following his guilty plea. Instead of challenging the evidence, they focused on presenting mitigating factors. They emphasized that Mark had no prior violent convictions, pointing out that his criminal record consisted only of arson, affray, and petty theft. They argued that the attack was an isolated incident rather than a pattern of recurring behavior. The defense highlighted Mark's remorse, evidenced by his early guilty plea, which, they claimed, demonstrated his acceptance of responsibility. They also noted Mark's limited recollection of the event but refrained from citing mental health issues, as no formal diagnosis had been provided. Their efforts were aimed at reducing his sentence, but the judge dismissed their arguments, stating that the guilty plea appeared to be more strategic than genuine. On September 14, 2017, Judge David Stockdale sentenced Mark Buckley to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years and 280 days before parole eligibility, meaning he would be 82 years old before being considered for release. The judge told Mark, who remained emotionless, that he had attacked Ellen in a savage and brutal manner. The judge stated that the victim, Ellen, would not have known that the attack was about to happen. He noted her small stature, her failed attempts to defend herself, and the injuries to her wrists. He also asserted that the attack was abusive in nature, citing evidence from items found in Mark's possession, and condemned his plans to bury Ellen. David Steele, 47, received a 2-year suspended sentence for obstructing justice and was ordered to complete unpaid community service. Vicky Calland and Dean Speakman were sentenced for destroying Ellen's belongings after learning about her murder. Dean received a 20-month jail sentence, while Vicky, a mother of 4, received a 16-month suspended sentence. Both wept in court during their sentencing. Initially, they claimed they believed Mark's story that the items he brought them belonged to a girl he had stolen from at a park bench. When they learned about Ellen's death and realized the items belonged to her, they panicked and burned the evidence to cover their tracks. Dean even returned to the scene the following day to ensure that Ellen's laptop was completely destroyed. In court, it was revealed that Dean had faced significant threats while in prison, requiring placement in protective custody, and Vicky had to move out of her home in Billingate due to hostile reactions from the community. Judge Stockdale considered the damage caused by the destruction of Ellen's laptop, noting that this had caused increased distress to her family and her boyfriend, Ryan. He explained that the loss of the laptop went beyond its monetary value. It contained invaluable memories, such as documents and photographs, that chronicled Ellen's life.
In the quiet town of Farmville, Virginia, one house looked strangely alive. The lights were on, the curtains drawn, but for 2 days, no one had been seen entering or leaving. Neighbors assumed the family was away. No one suspected anything was terribly wrong. When police finally broke open the door, they stopped in shock. 4 bodies lay inside: a mother, a father, and a 16-year-old daughter, and her best friend. There were no screams, no signs of struggle, no desperate attempts to escape. They all seemed to have died in their sleep. Within just 72 hours, what began as a routine visit had become a horrific nightmare. A young man who came to meet his online girlfriend was now alone at the airport, his clothes still stained with dried blood. He said he was waiting for a flight home. Instead, officers arrested him and began to uncover a story darker than anyone had imagined. This is the story of an online romance that twisted into obsession, of a girl who didn't recognize the danger standing right beside her, and of a brutal crime that still haunts Farmville to this day. Richard Samuel McCroskey was born on December 26, 1988, in Hayward, California. His family later moved to Castro Valley. As a child, Richard was shy but polite and kind. He kept mostly to himself and rarely caused trouble. Music played a major role in his life. Richard's father, a guitarist in a rock band, strongly influenced his musical preferences and introduced him to bands like Metallica and Primus. Ever since he was in elementary school, Richard had difficulty communicating with his friends and found it hard to fit in. Over time, he became an outcast. In high school, he was bullied for his weight and red hair, quiet and reserved. Richard endured the bullying without showing emotion. One day, when classmates physically assaulted him, he stood there without resistance. His sister, Sarah, witnessed the attack and told their parents, who decided to transfer him to another school. Unfortunately, the bullying continued at the new school. Eventually, Richard dropped out before earning his diploma. Struggling to connect with others, he spent most of his time alone. To escape reality, he immersed himself in violent video games and heavy metal music. His greatest refuge, however, became the social networking site MySpace. MySpace, which translates to MySpace in English, was one of the first international social networks. It was a community website and blogging platform where users could create interest groups, personal profiles, blog, post photos and videos, and listen to music by popular artists. Richard spent a lot of time on MySpace, and it eventually became something of an addiction. Social networks can be quite useful, though, as they allow people to find communities with shared interests and make friends around the world. On MySpace, Richard discovered groups of music enthusiasts who shared his love for his favorite genre. For the first time, Richard felt he truly belonged. His father introduced him to heavy rock, but then he discovered a new direction, horror music, and became truly obsessed. Horror music is a subgenre of hip-hop with lyrics based on horror movie imagery or even scarier, depicting the darkest evils of human nature. Raw, undisguised violence. Horrorcore songs often explored grim subjects such as death, bullying, mutilation, the occult, and mental illness. Richard was captivated by this intense, shocking style of music and became fully immersed in it. Eventually, horrorcore and MySpace became his main outlets. He began creating his own horror-inspired songs. The lyrics he wrote were extremely dark, filled with violent and disturbing imagery. There is a lot of controversy surrounding horrorcore music. Many critics argued that its violent themes promoted crime, but others believed it was simply artistic expression, no different from horror films or novels. The fact that someone wrote or sang about death did not necessarily mean they would act on those ideas. In Richard's case, the genre's focus on violence and serial killers appeared to influence his easily impressionable mind. However, his experience was more of an exception than a common occurrence. When Richard started creating his own music, he adopted the stage name Psycho Sam. Behind this online identity, the once shy and awkward teenager reinvented himself as a character fixated on violence and gore. Under this persona, he shared his disturbing lyrics on MySpace. The name Psycho Sam was a reference to David Berkowitz, the 1970s New York serial killer, who called himself the Son of Sam. In addition to MySpace, Richard also ran a YouTube channel called Lil de Mondage, which also reminded him of David. On this channel, he posted videos of minor crimes such as toppling crosses in cemeteries. In the video, he often drinks alcohol, occasionally uses illegal substances, and appears very cheerful. This new passion made Richard a big fan of the horror genre, and at the same time helped him make friends with people who shared his interests. In the summer of 2008, when he was 19 years old, Richard lived with his parents and worked part-time as a web designer. He mainly built websites for people in the horror film and art community. Thanks to social media, Richard gradually became somewhat well-known and got acquainted with a 15-year-old girl on the other side of the country, who was also a fan of horror. Their relationship began as a friendship and quickly turned into a long-distance relationship. Her name was Emma Niederbrock. She lived in Farmville, Virginia, with her father, Mark, a Presbyterian pastor of 6 years, and her mother, Deborah Kelly, a sociology and criminal justice professor at Longwood University. Deborah mentored many students who went on to successful careers in law enforcement, emergency services, and related fields. The Niederbrocks were well known and respected in their community. Since childhood, Emma had been a gentle and kind girl. However, growing up in a devout family, she gradually became rebellious as she entered her teenage years. She became drawn to Gothic fashion and the occult, showing much less interest in faith. Emma's friends saw her as a rebellious spirit obsessed with dark music, though she still enjoyed mainstream pop and played soccer. One day, Emma's mother, Deborah, accidentally finds creepy writings on her daughter's room wall. Concerned, she believed Emma's school environment was influencing her negatively. After consulting with Emma's father, they decided to homeschool her, hoping it would help. However, their strictness had the opposite effect. Confined at home, Emma found a new interest: the online horror community on MySpace. There, she went by the nickname RagD0LL. In September 2008, she met Seiko Sam online. The two quickly discovered many things in common. Richard had dropped out of school. Emma was homeschooled. Both felt isolated and shared a passion for music and horror culture. Soon after, they both experienced similar events. Their parents divorced. Richard's mother moved out, leaving him with his father, while Emma stayed with her mother. Despite the separation, Emma's parents remained close and continued to support her. Richard and Emma spoke frequently, first through MySpace messages, then on the phone, nearly every day. Although they had never met in person, Richard developed deep feelings for her. He felt she truly understood him and already thought of her as his girlfriend. Emma, too, was enamored. Richard was older, confident, and intriguing. Though they lived thousands of miles apart, their bond grew stronger with time. By September 2009, after a year of daily communication, Richard was 20 and Emma was 16. They finally decided to meet in person. A music festival in Detroit, Michigan, scheduled for September 12th, and featured several bands they both loved. It was the perfect opportunity for Richard, still struggling with his parents' divorce. The prospect of meeting Emma was the best thing that had happened in a while. Despite the long journey across the country, Richard was determined to go. Emma was equally excited, eager to impress the California guy she had fallen for. She also invited her friend Melanie Wells, an 18-year-old from West Virginia, whom she had met through MySpace and the horror community, to join them at the festival. Like Emma, Melanie was homeschooled, and despite living in different states, the two quickly became close friends. It was horrorcore music, with its violent lyrics and hip-hop beats, that connected Richard with Emma and Melanie. The upcoming festival offered them a chance to meet in person and interact with other fans and young musicians. The three decided to attend the festival together, but since they lived far apart, they needed to coordinate their travel. The plan was for Richard and Melanie to fly into Richmond, Virginia, and stay at Emma's home in Farmville. From there, Emma's parents would drive all three of them to the festival, which was about 10 hours away. When Emma explained the plan to her mother, Deborah, she was taken aback. Deborah had no ill will toward Melanie, but she was wary of letting Richard, a 20-year-old stranger, stay at her house for a few days. As a professor of sociology and criminal justice, Deborah tended to see warning signs and hidden motives in situations like this. Eventually, Emma convinced her that everything would be fine. Deborah agreed on one condition: she would accompany them and act as a chaperone. On September 11, 2009, Richard boarded a plane from Castro Valley, California, to Richmond, Virginia. He was extremely nervous. He was finally going to meet the girl he had admired for so long. Before boarding the plane, he received a sweet message from Emma, saying that the next time he logged into MySpace, he would be at her house. Richard eagerly anticipated their first meeting, but things did not go as he had hoped. When Emma saw him at the airport, she was shocked. The real Richard, the person behind the online name Seco Sam, looked nothing like his photos. He had carefully edited and staged his pictures to appear slimmer, taller, and more attractive. It wasn't just his appearance that was different. The confident, outgoing personality he showed online didn't match the shy, awkward young man standing before her. Richard was short, slightly overweight, and clearly uncomfortable in social situations. His cheeks flushed bright red, betraying his anxiety. Emma tried to act polite, but inwardly she was disappointed. The charismatic Psycho Sam she had fallen for online simply didn't exist. Richard immediately sensed her disinterest. It was written all over her face. Later, Melanie arrived, and she and Richard spent the night at Emma's house. The next day, September 12, they set out for the Horrorcore Music Festival. Richard still hoped Emma might warm up to him once they spent more time together. But at the festival, things only got worse. During the festival, Emma largely ignored him and even flirted with other guys. Richard watched her texting them, unable to contain his hurt. He kept trying to impress her, but got no reaction. It became obvious that once the festival ended, Emma would probably stop talking to him altogether. At only 16, she likely didn't realize how deeply her indifference affected him. Emma even confided to another online friend that Richard made her uncomfortable. By the end of the festival, Richard felt completely rejected, hurt, and angry. When they returned to Emma's house with Melanie, his feelings of resentment and confusion only grew stronger. Richard truly believed that his online chats with Emma had led to a real romantic relationship. Now, he was heartbroken to see that Emma, whom he considered his girlfriend, no longer wanted anything to do with him. No one could have predicted how far Richard would go for revenge on the girl, who, from his perspective, had made him travel across the country only to reject him. After the concert, Richard and his friend Melanie returned to Farmville. They planned to stay at Emma's house for a few more days before heading home. On Monday, Melanie posted on MySpace saying the festival had been amazing and announced that she would return to West Virginia on Wednesday. In the meantime, she continued spending time at Emma's house. According to Richard, nothing seemed different there. Emma completely avoided him, choosing to spend all her time with Melanie and ignoring his attempts to strike up a conversation. This made him feel awkward and unwelcome. Instead of leaving, he grew increasingly angry. His frustration increased as he drank heavily, smoked marijuana, and used other illegal substances. His resentment eventually boiled over. On September 15, 2009, in West Virginia, Melanie's parents, Thomas and Kathleen, tried to call their daughter for hours but couldn't get through. They were worried because they hadn't heard from her for days. Finally, Thomas decided to drive more than 300 kilometers to Farmville to check on her and pick her up. When he arrived, the house was locked. No one answered. He waited in his car for hours, but no one came back. After 7 hours, he gave up and drove home. The next day, September 16, Melanie still had not returned. Kathleen panicked and called everyone who might know her daughter. She learned that Melanie had attended the concert with Emma and a young man, but no one had seen her since. Desperate, Kathleen kept calling Emma's house until someone finally answered. The man introduced himself as Richard McCroskey. He told her that Melanie and Emma had gone to the movies, then abruptly ended the call. Finding this suspicious, Kathleen immediately called the police. The police went to the house and spoke to Richard. He still insisted that Emma and Melanie had gone to the movies. because the case involved adults. Police did not investigate further. Helpless, Kathleen called Mark, Emma's father, who lived nearby, to come and check. Mark agreed and promised to call back, but then he stopped calling. By September 18, with no response from Melanie or Mark, Kathleen again called the police and persuaded them to revisit the house. Around 3:00 p.m., officers arrived. The door was unlocked, and when they entered, they were met by the unmistakable smell of decay. Inside, they found the bodies of Emma, her mother Deborah, Melanie, and Mark. All four had been killed. Richard, who had earlier answered the door and said Emma and Melanie were going to the movies, was missing. He was immediately listed as a wanted person, either as a suspect or a witness in danger. After killing Mark, Richard stole his car keys, took Mark's Honda, and tried to drive to the airport to fly back to California. On the way, he lost control of the car and ran into a ditch. The highway patrol arrived and asked about the car. Richard said it belonged to his girlfriend's father. The officer ticketed him for driving without a license and had the Honda towed. Richard mentioned he was trying to catch a flight to California, so they let him go. With no car, Richard asked for a ride. A tow truck driver agreed to take him to the airport. The driver later said he was overcome by the stench coming from Richard, who hadn't bathed or changed clothes since the murders. His clothes were soaked in blood and even carried bits of human tissue, though the driver didn't realize the truth at the time, trying to suppress his nausea. The driver rolled down all the windows and drove to the airport. Richard had no idea the police were already looking for him. When the officer who had ticketed him returned to the station, he discovered that Richard McCroskey was wanted in connection with a gruesome quadruple homicide. He immediately notified the authorities that Richard was on his way to Richmond Airport. Early in the morning of September 19, 2009, police found Richard McCroskey asleep in a chair at the Richmond International Airport baggage claim area. He had spent the night there waiting for his flight back to California, scheduled for Sunday. He tried to change his flight but couldn't afford it. His arrest was calm and orderly. Officers simply asked him to come with them, and since he had no prior criminal record, they didn't put him in handcuffs. When questioned about the murders, Richard calmly stated that Jesus made him do it. He was charged with 4 counts of murder, robbery, and theft of Mark's Honda. From the start, all the evidence pointed to him flying across the country to meet his online girlfriend, Emma, and attend a music festival. Richard was the last known person to see all 4 victims alive. His clothes were soaked with their blood. Messages on MySpace revealed a romantic relationship between him and Emma. Friends in the online community who met them at the festival said Richard was devastated by Emma's rejection. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he never denied the killings. At first, Richard refused to speak with police, but after consulting with his lawyer, he agreed to explain what had happened and why. He said Emma was his main target because she had rejected him, and he killed the others to eliminate any witnesses. Everything known about that night in Farmville comes from Richard's own statements. According to him, on Tuesday, September 15, while the others slept, he lay awake, unable to rest. Under the influence of alcohol and banned substances, he lay in bed recalling the events that had just happened. The excitement of the trip, the awkward encounter with Emma, and her flirting with other men at the festival. He grew increasingly upset but tried to stay calm, hoping she would eventually warm up to him. He had dreamed of a happy meeting after months of chatting online, but the reality left him disappointed. Back at the Farmville house, Emma continued to ignore him, choosing instead to spend time with her friend Melanie. Richard became frustrated and angry. This emotional turmoil triggered what came next. At about 3:00 a.m., Richard left the living room, picked up a hammer weighing about 3.3 to 4.5 kilograms from the backyard, and went inside. He first attacked Melanie Wells, 18, as she slept on the sofa on the first floor. He then went upstairs to kill Deborah, 53, in her office, before going downstairs to Emma, 16's room. All 3, Melanie, Deborah, and Emma, were asleep when he attacked them. There were no signs of struggle on their bodies. suggesting that none had time to wake up or realize what was happening. On September 17, 2009, around 5 p.m., 50-year-old Mark, Emma's father, arrived at Deborah's house. He was worried because he hadn't heard from either Emma or Deborah in several days. Kathleen, Melanie's mother, had also called to say she couldn't reach her daughter. When Mark unlocked the door and stepped into the living room, Richard suddenly attacked him from behind with a maul. The surprise attack gave Richard the advantage, and he killed Mark before Mark could defend himself. Richard then dragged Mark's body into Emma's first-floor bedroom, where he had already hidden Melanie's body. Afterward, he tried to clean up the bloodstains in the living room to cover his tracks. Richard spent the next day and a half in the house with the bodies of Emma, Deborah, and Melanie. Realizing the enormity of what he had done, Richard became uncertain about what to do next. At one point, he used a digital camera to record a video in which he confessed his guilt. He was subsequently arrested and held at Piedmont Regional Jail under close surveillance. Because of the brutality of the murders, prosecutors sought the death penalty. Facing that possibility, Richard's attorney persuaded him to accept a plea deal to avoid execution. Richard agreed and pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder. In return for his guilty plea, he was spared the death penalty, but sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms without parole. During sentencing, Richard remained silent and showed no remorse, only a smirk. It seemed he still didn't fully comprehend the gravity of his actions. As he left the courthouse, Richard again smiled at reporters and walked toward the van, taking him back to prison. Despite that attitude, his lawyer later said he was not proud of his actions. He also waived his right to appeal, meaning he will likely spend the rest of his life in prison. Defense attorneys argued that the murders had nothing to do with the horrorcore music Richard enjoyed. Instead, they said he was enraged by the end of his relationship with Emma, while the other 3 victims were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Richard had built a fantasy version of himself online as a dark, confident rising star in the horrorcore scene. But when he met Emma in person, the socially awkward young man failed to meet her expectations. Rejected once again, just as he had been many times before. Richard's despair turned into violence. Today, Richard is serving his sentence at Green Rock Correctional Center in Virginia. He is not well liked among inmates and is often mocked, though he has refused media interviews. A former cellmate revealed that Richard does, in fact, feel remorse for his crimes.
Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Caitlin Root. Sometimes, criminals who look for victims just for fun or out of a desire to kill. In the state of Missouri, USA, there is a town called St. Joseph. This is a small town with many parks, museums, and other attractions, as well as a large number of running tracks and walking paths in one of the parks called Krug. On Sunday, October 16, 2016, a man went out jogging. Closer to the end of the trail, the man noticed something suspicious on the path. Initially, he thought it was a mannequin because Halloween is coming soon. So, he calmly continued to run past it. When he reached the object, however, he noticed blood on it. At first, he simply ran past, but something alerted him and made him turn back. The mannequin suspiciously resembled the body of a girl. There was a hole in her chest. She was lying on the asphalt without clothes, in a pool of blood. The frightened witness called 911 for help. Even when he contacted the dispatcher, he was not sure whether it was a mannequin or not. This story unfolded in mid-October, 2 weeks before Halloween, when one could encounter various oddities. Perhaps it was a Halloween prank or some kind of decoration for the holiday. When the police arrived at the scene to investigate, they confirmed the witness's worst fears. It was indeed the body of a girl. The criminal did not even bother to hide the traces of his crime. Just a meter away, clothes were found, which had been neatly cut off. Additionally, the girl's false nails were scattered around the body, indicating that she had desperately resisted and that her nails had been damaged in the struggle. During their examination, forensic scientists were unable to find any identification documents for the girl. She had no personal belongings, means of communication, or the weapon used in the crime. To make initial conclusions, it was crucial to determine who the victim of this brutal massacre was. The only clue that could help the police was a T-shirt she wore. It had an inscription indicating that she was a student at Central High School, graduating in 2017. It was assumed she was a high school student preparing to receive her diploma the following year. The fingerprints of the victim were collected, but no matches were found in the national database. This was not surprising. Given the approximate age of the victim, it was unlikely she had a criminal record. The authorities were forced to close the park to visitors for the next 24 hours to continue inspecting the area. A larger scale operation was launched, involving many more law enforcement officers, and results came quickly. They were able to find broken parts of a mobile phone, which had been disassembled and scattered around the area. Over the next few days, the communication device was collected and completely restored. Meanwhile, the forensic expert performed an autopsy on the body, revealing that the girl had been brutally tortured before her death. Her throat had been cut twice, but that was not the cause of her death. She had received several stab wounds from an object similar to a knife, one of which had pierced her liver and caused fatal bleeding. Without emergency assistance, a cut throat could also have killed her. There were signs of prolonged strangulation on her face, which complicated the determination of exactly what had occurred. According to the forensic expert, the strangulation may have involved something like a long piece of fabric. Simultaneously, several officers visited the school indicated on the girl's T-shirt to identify any missing high school girls. At the school, the police talked to the principal and teachers, showed them photographs of the unidentified victim. The girl was recognized. Her name was Caitlin Root. She had studied there for some time before switching to homeschool. Caitlin was born on November 11, 1998, into a large family with 5 sisters and 5 brothers. She was very positive, artistic, and funny, and loved singing, dancing, walking in the fresh air. Her last hobby was hunting for Pokémon in the park, which was very popular at the time. It was unclear what attracted her to Krug Park, located in another area of the city that was less known to her. It was beautiful and quiet, a favorite place for many runners until this tragedy occurred. However, there were some remote and gloomy spots where locals rarely ventured. That is where Caitlin's body was discovered. At school, Caitlin's close friends were devastated by her loss, and they willingly cooperated with the investigation. When the Root family was informed that the body of their missing daughter had been found, everyone was heartbroken. They desperately wanted to find who had so cruelly taken the life of a girl just 3 weeks shy of her 18th birthday. Despite her close relationship with the family, at the time of the incident, Caitlin did not live with them. She had grown up and wanted more independence, freedom, so she was temporarily staying with her best friend, who lived with her grandmother. The whole group had to maintain constant contact, but nothing suspicious was noticed. The police visited this house to speak with all its residents. In fact, the family with whom Caitlin was living at the time noticed her disappearance and contacted the police. Upon identification, the police talked to Caitlin's friend's family and finally received the first valuable clue. According to Caitlin's friend's mother, a few days before the crime, Caitlin had an online argument with her boyfriend. She was planning to break up with him, but the situation escalated into a big fight. The woman reported that their last meeting ended in a confrontation, after which Caitlin was left with a bruise. This mark was also found during the autopsy. All this gave the police their first suspect, whom they decided to interview. They were not able to find him right away, but several of Caitlin's boyfriend's friends responded. None of them believed that Caitlin's boyfriend could physically harm Caitlin, as he was not prone to aggression or violence. No one had noticed anything like that about him before. However, the police wanted to speak with him in person. Witnesses were also found who reported seeing his car, which allegedly stopped near Krug Park late in the evening. All this strengthened the suspicion against him. Finally, the police met with Caitlin's boyfriend. The evidence of his involvement began to mount, as there were numerous marks on his body and arms, minor wounds resembling scratches. He attributed these to branches while riding a motorcycle. He stated that he met with Caitlin, and the last time they saw each other was on Thursday, a few days before the murder. On that day, a friend of his also joined them. Everything seemed fine, and according to him, Caitlin spent a lot of time with them, with no conflicts occurring. Therefore, he found it very unpleasant to receive a call 2 days after this meeting from an unknown person who accused him of beating women. This voice sounded threatening and offered to meet to confront him about what he had done to Caitlin. The caller then hung up. Caitlin's boyfriend didn't understand that there was a deeper implication behind this. Despite there being no conflicts between them, he was surprised when Caitlin later accused him of breaking her nose. After that, she hung up and ignored his calls. He considered any accusations of aggression and cruelty, especially towards his girlfriend, to be absurd. Afterward, Caitlin's boyfriend published several posts on his social media, suggesting that Caitlin had convinced her friends to turn against him. He couldn't understand the reasons behind it but felt he didn't have time to figure out the details. Notably, he provided an alibi for almost the entire Saturday and Sunday, having visited several friends, all of which were confirmed, leaving no time window sufficient for an attack. Despite the suspicion, nothing significant could be obtained against him, except for the name of another potential suspect. Caitlin's boyfriend told the detectives about Adam, who, according to Caitlin, had been literally obsessed with her. He behaved anxiously to such an extent that he began to stalk her, sending letters with ambiguous content and insinuating that he might take his own life if she didn't want to meet him. Before the crime, the police learned that Adam communicated with his best friend on social media on October 15th at around 8 p.m., which was the last time he contacted her. To the surprise of the police, this best friend turned out to be Caitlin. Adam had added her to his list of close friends, probably to avoid drawing attention to his unhealthy attraction to her. Before meeting with this new suspect, the detectives decided to gather more information about him and interviewed his closest acquaintances. They discovered that both Caitlin and Adam attended a party on the night of the murder and were supposed to spend time together. At the gathering, Adam was accompanied by a couple of friends, and there were witnesses who saw the whole group leave late in the evening, with Caitlin among them. Several attendees were confident that they all planned to go to Krug Park, where Caitlin's body was later found. It is noteworthy that they returned without Caitlin and told everyone that she had left with an unknown group of people, which seemed strange, uncharacteristic of her. Upon checking Adam's social media profiles, it turned out that the day after the murder, he began posting peculiar messages. While he did not specifically mention what he had done, he clearly expressed regret for some action. However, when interrogated, he insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime and that the post referred to something entirely different. Instead, he recounted his version of events. According to Adam, when they left the party, Caitlin received a message from a friend named Amanda. After exchanging several short messages, they agreed to meet at Krug Park. Adam stated that he had warned Caitlin that it was a bad idea to meet anyone at such a late hour, especially in a park he barely knew, but she didn't heed his advice and left. Adam claimed that he was just friends with Caitlin, had no conflicts with her, countering the allegations of stalking and obsession, which he also considered absurd. He showed the detectives the correspondence, where they found nothing incriminating. By Adam's own admission, the allegations of obsession with Caitlin were clearly fabricated. He explained that the last time he saw her was not far from the place where they had spent time with friends, and she got into an SUV, which she was probably picked up in by Amanda. Adam himself saw this car for the first time, did not know who it belonged to, he couldn't recognize it, nor could the other participants at the meeting. He insisted that he believed Amanda was involved in what happened to Caitlin. Interestingly, his account was immediately confirmed by several witnesses among the young people who were at that meeting. They also saw how Caitlin got into an unknown Santa Fe SUV while Adam stayed with them. Adam appeared extremely upset and even went to the family of the deceased to express his condolences. Everyone believed that he sincerely mourned this loss and willingly helped the Root family cope with their grief, even assisting Caitlin's family during the funeral. Further investigation confirmed that she had indeed communicated with a girl named Amanda. When detectives spoke to the father of Caitlin, David Stevens, it turned out that David was well acquainted with all of his daughter's close friends. There weren't many of them, and Amanda was among them. According to him, their relationship was complicated. The teenagers were sometimes best friends and at other times fought and literally hated each other. It emerged that this girl was known to both Caitlin's best friend and her mother, both of whom considered Amanda a very unpleasant character who left mixed impressions. Consequently, the police became interested in Amanda and decided to meet with her. She was detained and ended up under interrogation. Amanda did not immediately disclose all the information they knew about the case. She even reported that Caitlin had disappeared rather than died. From the very beginning, Amanda acted as if she did not understand what was happening. According to her, she did not call Caitlin on that fateful evening, had not seen her. Amanda countering what Adam and his friends claimed. Their last conversation, she said, took place on Saturday afternoon. She even provided the police with her social media account so that investigators could verify her statements. She used the pseudonym Amanda Panda without any photos. Amanda continued to deny that she had communicated with or met her friend on Sunday and provided an alibi, stating that her neighbor could confirm she had spent the entire evening at home. The police checked this information, and the woman confirmed the alibi, reporting that she had repeatedly seen Amanda in the house throughout the evening, including at the approximate time of the attack. They had crossed paths and communicated several times, which ruled out her involvement in the crime. Amanda had no plans to go out anywhere and had been at home all evening in her loungewear. After this confirmation, the police were forced to let Amanda go. All possible leads were investigated, but they remained empty-handed. The investigation reached a dead end. Due to the many participants involved, the story became so confusing that it spiraled out of control. Then, the police accessed Caitlin's mobile phone in search of clues, allowing detectives to navigate the gallery and find a photo that was the last one taken before the brutal attack. There were no people in the image, but it included the facade of a store found in the city, about 5 kilometers from Caitlin's house. After obtaining access to the recordings from the store's CCTV cameras, they managed to find a car that matched the description of the SUV associated with the team. When this photo was taken near the store, a dark car pulled up, from which a limping man emerged. He bought snacks and immediately left. Unfortunately, this did not yield any clues, as the store employees did not remember anyone, and the image was too blurry. The police continued to study the mobile phone of Caitlin regarding the account named Amanda Dow. Correspondence from this page revealed that she had communicated with Caitlin on the evening of her murder. Between them, there was a short dialogue where the girls agreed to meet and smoke a joint. As it turned out, this account belonged to a girl named Amanda Bennett, the same Amanda who was now under scrutiny by the authorities and likely had several accounts on social media. She was a 17-year-old girl who, at the time, was in a serious relationship with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Sebastian Dowell. The police went to the address where Amanda and Sebastian lived. They immediately found a dark Santa Fe SUV that matched the description of the one captured on CCTV at the convenience store where Caitlin had filmed just before her death. There were enough clues to consider Amanda and Sebastian prime suspects. They were arrested, and while they provided an alibi, it took some time to verify it. It was decided to arrest them and also confiscate their vehicles, mobile phones for examination. Detectives questioned they separately. When they spoke to Amanda, they didn't disclose what they knew. They simply decided to restore the chronology of events starting from Friday, which was a clever move. In fact, the police were particularly interested in Saturday and Sunday. If Amanda remembered Friday well but suddenly could not recall anything from Sunday, it would appear suspicious. The police often use this technique during interrogations to break down criminals. Amanda detailed her Friday evening spent with her boyfriend and their 2-month-old child. Difficulties arose, however, when she was asked about Saturday. Suddenly, she claimed that she had actually confused the days, and the events she described occurred on Saturday. Meanwhile, Sebastian also struggled. He could not recall what he had been doing with his common-law wife in the past few days. His statements increasingly contradicted the story he had provided. Everything suggested that Amanda had prepared for her meeting with the police, but she became a little confused. Her boyfriend didn't have much time either. He couldn't even say anything about the movie they supposedly watched together at the cinema, despite Amanda describing it in detail. But they was never found on the CCTV footage. There were no tickets or any data confirming that they had been in the area over that weekend. Amanda's story remained uncorroborated. This suspicious couple was clearly lying to the police. When Sebastian was confronted with the obvious inconsistencies in their stories, he became nervous. After that, the police noticed there were some cuts on his hands. Sebastian said they were from a cat, however, he later changed his story and admitted that they might be from his knives. His collection contained numerous stabbing and cutting items. During the arrest and searches, several knives from Sebastian's collection were confiscated in hopes of finding blood on them. Later, the examination confirmed that there were particles of Caitlin's blood on one knife. During the conversation, it became evident that Sebastian was in a subordinate position in the relationship, which he confirmed by stating that Amanda controlled everything happening 100% and that he obeyed her. According to him, Amanda completely excluded strangers from their social circle. He didn't even have friends that he could choose on his own. In fact, his social interactions were restricted because Sebastian complained that he had to ask for permission for any of his desires. For example, he liked to smoke a joint, but he would only do so after getting Amanda's approval. She was jealous and rude. In fits of anger, she often beat Sebastian quite cruelly. Once, she even broke his ribs. Sebastian feared that Amanda would eventually kill him with a knife. Sebastian said that Amanda suffered from some mental disorders that would suddenly thrust her into this aggressive state shortly before the crime. They had gone to a psychotherapist, but all the doctor did was double the dosage of her medications. However, Sebastian was not entirely innocent either. His social media profile contained a lot of dark humor, as well as cruel and murderous imagery. It seemed he was obsessed with this topic. Despite the detectives not revealing the real reason for Amanda and Sebastian's arrest, it turned out that Sebastian was aware of the murder in the park. He insisted that he had heard about it on social media, but he had already been caught in a lie. The more nervous he became, the more his story changed. In the end, he admitted that he knew Caitlin quite well. They communicated frequently. He and Caitlin were good friends. Caitlin even visited them in the hospital to congratulate them on the birth of their child, during which she spoke warmly about him, touching Amanda, the new mother. From that moment on, indirect evidence began to surface, suggesting that the tragedy was provoked by Amanda's jealousy and erratic behavior. At first, Sebastian denied such assumptions, but later he confessed that Amanda had often expressed anger towards him when he exchanged compliments with Caitlin. He continued to deny any romantic connection between them, insisting that it was purely friendly communication, while also maintaining that he was not involved in any crime. One of their friends mentioned that Amanda had always been friendly, sociable, and positive. However, the situation changed dramatically after the birth of their child, which many attributed to postpartum depression. In addition, she believed that something more than just friendship had developed between Sebastian and Caitlin. Amanda frequently referred to Caitlin and was clearly angry, exhibiting intense jealousy towards her boyfriend. Judging by her friend's words, this turned into an obsession with getting rid of Caitlin. Moreover, Amanda was aware of many details about the crime that she could not have known by chance, as they had not been covered in the media. This discussion smoothly led to topics about their relationships and the birth of the child. Amanda's demeanor visibly changed when they began discussing Caitlin and Sebastian. This was clearly a sensitive subject for her, but she composed herself and did not reveal her emotions. It is curious that during the entire interrogation, Amanda did not show any regret or pity toward her friend. On the contrary, from the very beginning, she appeared in high spirits and giggled frequently. Considering the circumstances that had led Amanda to this situation, her behavior seemed unsettling. The true motive behind this case included records of demonic summonings. This confirmed that he was involved in all sorts of dark themes with his girlfriend, but he claimed that it was all part of a hobby and role, playing games, insisting that they did not take it too far or commit any crimes. However, there was confirmation that they planned the murder in stages. Even though the information was deleted, it was easily recoverable. This became the main incriminating evidence against both criminals. When both were informed about this evidence, they abruptly changed their tactics, refuting their earlier statements and beginning to blame each other. Judging by their correspondence and records found in the house, both criminals were charged with first-degree murder. Upon reviewing their dialogues, the frightening truth of this brutal massacre was revealed. The murder was indeed ritualistic. That evening, Amanda and Sebastian sent a message to 6 contacts from their list to lure one of the victims into a trap. They probably did not care who responded, but only Caitlin Root did, which ultimately sealed her fate. The jury was shocked by the senselessness of this act of violence, simultaneously remained confident that it was Amanda who initiated it and took the life of Caitlin with pleasure. Her fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, and Sebastian likely helped by holding Caitlin. On May 5, 2017, Sebastian Dowell was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder in the death of Caitlin Root. Just days later, on May 9, 2017, Amanda Bennett was sentenced to life in prison for the same crime, second-degree murder. Both are without the possibility of parole. Caitlin's family, while satisfied with the sentence, expressed deep sorrow over the loss of their daughter.
Kimberly was once considered an icon of beauty and resilience. At 20, she was both Miss Manicore and an ambitious dental student. Her life seemed to be unfolding with great promise. But in a single night in May 2020, everything crumbled. Right in the apartment she thought was her safest haven. When the police broke down the door, they were shocked by what they found. The room was unnaturally cold. A trail of blood stretched across the floor, and under the white sheets lay Kimberly's body, carefully covered, as if the killer had tried to delay the discovery of the truth. The man who had last been with her had vanished into the night, leaving behind countless chilling questions. What happened behind closed doors at 11 o'clock p.m.? Why could a man who had once appeared so polite and kind become so cruelly ruthless? The manhunt, which spanned the Amazon rainforest and extended to the Venezuelan border, gradually revealed his true nature. This is a story of jealousy turning into obsession, of ignored warning signs, and of a tragedy that shook Brazil. Kimberly Karen Mota de Oliveira was born in Manicore, a small town in the state of Amazonas. She grew up with 2 younger brothers and was the only daughter in the family. She was especially close to her mother, Nella, a former beauty pageant contestant. There's a deep bond between mother and daughter. They understand each other without needing many words and share a passion for beauty pageants. Her first interest from a very young age, her mother has always been the one who supports her unconditionally. From her first times walking the catwalk and doing photo shoots to participating in beauty pageants, Kimberly has developed confidence and gradually affirmed herself. By 2019, her efforts were rewarded when she earned the title of Miss Manicore and became a finalist in the Miss Amazonas regional competition. For someone from a small town, this was an incredible achievement. At only 20 years old, Kimberly showed impressive discipline. Her social media profiles reflected the confidence and professionalism of someone far more experienced, highlighting her strong ambition. Nevertheless, she understood that the modeling industry could be uncertain and unpredictable. Therefore, she chose to pursue another path: dentistry. This was also the reason she moved to Manaus to study. There, she lived with her Uncle Henry, who always supported her decisions and helped her adapt to city life. Kimberly skillfully balanced her university studies, fitness training, competition preparation, and honing her skills and appearance. She never complained, always doing everything with the quiet determination honed over many years. Her work ethic, focus, and clear direction opened up 2 promising career paths for her. Sadly, she never had the opportunity to fully pursue either. Kimberly's life changed dramatically when Rafael Fernandez Rodriguez appeared. He was 31 years old, a court analyst with a stable career and known for his education. After a divorce, he had moved to Manaus in 2017 to start over. On the surface, Raphael seemed confident and respectable. Yet, behind that image, there were subtle warning signs that later appeared significant. It was later revealed that Raphael had been aware of Kimberly before they ever met. He had quietly followed her social media for some time, watching her posts and updates without ever interacting. Kimberly, unaware of this, only met him by chance at a club in Manaus. When Raphael approached her, offering her a drink and inviting her to dance, she politely declined, not wanting to initiate anything under those circumstances. However, he wouldn't give up. The next day, Raphael began engaging with her online, liking old photos, sending direct messages, and attempting to start conversations. Eventually, he found her phone number and began messaging her on WhatsApp, persistently seeking her attention. Gradually, they started talking more, though all the initiative came from Raphael's side. Initially, his interest seemed persistent without being irritating. After a few in-person meetings, he quickly pushed for a formal relationship, and by March 2020, they were officially dating. Still, certain details about how their relationship began remain troubling. How intentional was his approach? Was any of it planned ahead of time? One thing is certain, Raphael entered Kimberly's life so quietly and confidently that no one around her noticed anything unusual. After Kimberly and Raphael began dating in March 2020, everything seemed fine at first, but cracks soon began to show. Raphael was nothing like the image he initially projected. He became increasingly jealous and out of control. He regularly checked Kimberly's phone, going through her contacts, messages, and even her photos. His controlling behavior escalated. Raphael demanded that she cut off contact with all men, whether they were friends, classmates, or distant relatives. He also imposed restrictions on her social media activity. He criticized her photos, calling them too revealing, and insisted that she ask for his approval before posting anything online. He constantly asked her where she was, who she was with, and when she would be home. These questions became increasingly frequent and controlling, representing a serious invasion of privacy. This type of behavior usually doesn't end on its own, but escalates over time. After each argument, Raphael tried to make amends with sweet gestures like gifts, flowers, or inviting Kimberly to fancy dinners. While these actions sometimes calmed her down, they didn't change the fundamental nature of the problem. She gradually realized the familiar pattern. After each controlling phase came a cycle of making amends, followed by conflict again. She confided to her friends that she felt stifled because Raphael was too jealous, always controlling everything and making her lose her sense of freedom. The relationship didn't last long, but it left Kimberly with a great deal of psychological pressure that she had never experienced before. By mid-spring that year, she decided to break up. She didn't tell Raphael immediately, waiting for the right time, hoping to end things amicably. But that never happened. On May 10, 2020, Mother's Day, Kimberly began her morning with an Instagram post. She shared a picture with her mother, Nayla, and wrote a heartfelt message about how much she missed her and how hard it was to spend the day apart. It was a simple, genuine post, nothing alarming or out of the ordinary. Later that morning, she went for a jog with her Uncle Henry, some of his friends, and Raphael. The run took place in one of Manaus's public parks. According to Henry, everything between Kimberly and Raphael looked normal. No arguments, no tension, no unusual behavior. However, that normalcy concealed what was truly happening within the relationship. This contrast between the outward appearance and reality made the warning signs difficult to recognize. After returning home, Kimberly got ready to meet a friend. She told Henry she would be home late and asked him to leave the door unlocked so she wouldn't wake him. This was typical for her. She often had busy evenings due to college, pageant preparations, and social events. At around 10:30 p.m., she texted Henry again to say she'd be coming home later and that Raphael would drive her back. Her message sounded calm, without any sign of tension. Henry replied that he'd leave the door open and wished her a good night. That was the last known message sent from Kimberly's phone. After that, All communication stopped. Neither Kimberly nor Raphael contacted anyone again. In the early hours of May 12, 2020, Manaus police broke into Raphael's apartment after Kimberly's family called for help because they couldn't contact her for hours. Upon entering, they quickly realized something terrible had happened. In the bedroom, they found Kimberly's body covered with a bedsheet. A large pool of blood lay on the floor, surrounded by bloody footprints. On the balcony, they found a kitchen knife with both the blade and handle stained with dried blood. Fingerprint analysis later revealed that after Kimberly stopped responding to messages, only one person remained in the apartment. The room temperature was unusually low. The air conditioner had been set to its coldest level. This was not incidental. Experts assert that such a reduction in temperature can slow down the decomposition of a body after death. This suggests someone deliberately delayed the discovery of the body. Such actions are rarely impulsive. They typically indicate some understanding of the processes that occur after death. When Kimberly's body was discovered, police quickly dropped their earlier theory of a double disappearance. It was now evident she had never left the apartment, prompting investigators to shift their focus to a criminal case. The incident was officially reclassified as a homicide, and Raphael became the main suspect. His disappearance, signs that he had fled, and his failure to contact family or authorities reinforced the suspicion that he had deliberately left the scene. Around 6 o'clock a.m., authorities confirmed the discovery of Kimberly's body and began a search for Raphael. A key breakthrough came from reviewing the building's surveillance footage. Security cameras captured the exact moment Kimberly and Raphael entered the building around 11 o'clock p.m. At first, they appeared calm as they walked through the lobby. No visible tension or conflict. The elevator camera showed the same neutral expressions, no signs of argument. After that, the hallway footage showed only emptiness. From that point until about 1:30 a.m., there was complete silence. Nearly 3 hours later, the elevator doors opened again. This time, only Raphael emerged. He moved at a steady, deliberate pace. There was no sign of panic. He carefully closed the front doors, even checking the lock before walking out of view. The timeline immediately drew investigators' attention. The cameras never recorded Kimberly leaving the building. There was no footage of her in the hallway, lobby, or elevator after entering with Raphael. The last time she was seen was when she entered with Raphael at 11 o'clock p.m., while Raphael left alone at 1:30 a.m. This was a crucial detail in reconstructing the events. After Kimberly's body was found, forensic experts estimated her time of death based on her body temperature, tissue condition, and the effects of the cold environment. Their findings matched the time frame between her arrival with Raphael and his later departure alone, giving investigators a clear and consistent sequence of events. The details of what occurred inside Raphael's apartment only became known after his arrest. During questioning, he gave a detailed statement. According to Raphael, he and Kimberly returned to the apartment that night, and their interaction seemed calm at first. At one point, Kimberly went to take a shower, leaving her phone in the bedroom. Raphael said he decided to look through her phone. He opened her messages, checked several apps, and found exchanges with other men that he considered offensive. That, he claimed, was what triggered what came next. After reading the messages, he went to the kitchen, selected the largest knife, and concealed it under his clothes. He did not specify how much time passed, but his actions suggested calculation rather than sudden rage. When Kimberly came out of the shower and lay on the bed, he confronted her about the messages. According to his statement, she denied being involved with anyone else, and an argument followed. He then used a knife to inflict fatal wounds to Kimberly's neck and abdomen. After Kimberly showed no signs of life, Raphael stated that he tried to move her body to conceal the incident. However, seeing the blood all over the floor, he abandoned the idea, covered her with a sheet, and left the body in the bedroom. To reduce the smell and slow the decomposition process, Raphael set the air conditioner to a very low temperature before leaving the room. This action was later considered a crucial detail in the investigation, as it demonstrated calculated planning and an effort to control the situation. When he left the apartment, Raphael took Kimberly's phone and threw it into a wooded area outside the city. He apparently wanted to make it harder for investigators to track her location or review her messages. Despite this, investigators were later able to retrace his movements using cameras and other tracking data. After the crime, Rafael left the apartment and called his father, Nilton Rodriguez. During the call, he confessed to what he had done. His father urged him to surrender to the authorities right away. Those were Nilton's last words to his son, as he passed away shortly after the call. While Rafael's family was dealing with that loss, he fled toward the border. Driving on the BR 174 highway, he was later captured on cameras speeding. Eventually, footage showed his car overturned near the Cacara area. Rafael managed to climb out of the wreck and continued his escape on foot. Later, he took a taxi to a bank, withdrew some money to fund his flight, and kept traveling until he reached Boavista, near the Venezuelan border. There, he withdrew more cash. His plan seemed clear: cross the border and vanish. However, in May 2020, strict health checkpoints were established. At one checkpoint, when asked to register his information, Rafael was denied entry and unable to cross the border. He then went deep into the forest near the checkpoint, building a makeshift shelter with branches and salvaged materials. Surprisingly, he hired a group of locals to guard him. Investigators believe this indicates Rafael wasn't planning a short-term escape, but was preparing for a long-term hiding place, with cash and shelter already in place. After Kimberly's body was found, local residents told police they had seen someone hiding in the forest near the border. Acting on this tip, a special police unit searched the area. When officers approached the shelter, they encountered 6 armed men blocking their path with machetes. The men said they were protecting someone inside. A tense standoff ensued until police announced they were pursuing a suspect in a serious crime. Only then did the group retreat, claiming they didn't know the identity of the person they were protecting and were simply hired. Inside the shelter, officers found Rafael. He didn't resist and was taken into custody without incident. He was escorted out of the forest and taken to a local police station before being transferred to Manaus. At the station, Rafael gave his first official statement. He confessed to the crime, describing it as an impulsive act of rage triggered by something he saw on Kimberly's phone. He insisted that he hadn't planned anything and acted purely out of emotion. However, investigators had evidence that told a different story. His choice of weapon, his attempts to slow down decomposition, and his destruction of Kimberly's phone all suggested deliberate actions. This created a major inconsistency. Rafael's claim of an emotional outburst didn't match his methodical behavior afterward. This contradiction cast serious doubt on his version of events. After the confession was recorded, the case was transferred to the prosecutor's office and preparations for trial began. The legal proceedings were delayed multiple times. Additionally, Rafael's attorneys requested a psychiatric evaluation, arguing that he wasn't mentally fit to stand trial. After several months, experts concluded that he was competent. 9 witnesses took the stand during the hearings. One of them was a former partner of Rafael, who confirmed his long-standing jealousy and controlling nature, even before meeting Kimberly. Investigators presented a detailed reconstruction of the crime, including the timeline, surveillance footage, forensic findings from the apartment, and Rafael's own confession. In late October 2021, the court sentenced Rafael Rodriguez to 14 years in prison. The verdict was devastating for Kimberly's family. The day became even more painful just hours later, when Kimberly's mother, Nayla, passed away after a long battle with cancer. Her death, coinciding with the sentencing, deepened the family's grief. Public reaction was almost unanimous. Many felt the sentence was too light and unfair. Social media filled with criticism of the justice system as people expressed anger over the perceived leniency of the law. This backlash highlighted the gap between the severity of the crime and the punishment given. Kimberly's funeral took place in her hometown of Manacorí. Over 200 people attended: relatives, classmates, close friends, and townspeople who remembered her from local pageants. Her uncle Henry accompanied the casket to the burial site, his grief reflecting the collective sorrow felt by everyone there. Meanwhile, Raphael's mother publicly defended her son, claiming he had acted out of love and shouldn't be judged harshly. Her comments sparked outrage, as Kimberly's family saw them as an attempt to excuse his actions. In 2023, Raphael's sentence was reduced by 8 months due to a clerical error in the court's calculations. This development reignited public anger. This time, the discontent wasn't just emotional, it was directed at a deeper issue: the excessive leniency of the justice system towards similar cases. For Kimberly's family, the case represented an unbearable double loss. They lost Kimberly, and just days later, her mother, who died without seeing complete justice. That tragic sequence of events remains one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the case. In a sleepy Ohio town where everyone knows each other by name and believes that bad things happen somewhere else, there is a woman who has always been seen as a model of kindness, a gentle mother, a devoted neighbor, a quiet pillar of the community. No one could have imagined that her kindness would lead her to a horrific end, and when the truth finally comes out, it leaves everyone asking a chilling question. How could a seemingly normal family hide such a dark secret? Mary Tench was born on April 19, 1958, in Youngstown, Ohio, a small city of about 60,000 residents. She grew up in a loving household, receiving plenty of affection and attention from her parents. This strong family foundation allowed them to remain close long after the children became adults and moved away. Mary was one of 6 siblings, raised in a lively, tightly connected home. From childhood, she was known as a gentle, thoughtful girl. During her school years, this warm personality helped her form a wide circle of friends with whom she stayed in touch for many years. Eventually, her kind nature also caught the attention of a young man named James Tench. They met when they were still very young and began as friends, before gradually developing mutual romantic feelings. Mary and James grew closer with time. Their friendship deepened into love. They later married. Not long after, they began thinking about starting a family. They went on to have 2 children, their eldest daughter, Jennifer, and their son, James Jr., affectionately called Jimmy. One of their proudest achievements was buying a plot of land and building their dream home with their own hands. The family of 4 settled in Brunswick, Ohio, an inviting suburb that offered space, comfort, and a peaceful environment. Both parents worked tirelessly to secure a stable future for their children. In 2011, James began experiencing unexplained weakness, which soon escalated into severe pain. After being hospitalized, he received a devastating diagnosis: cancer. The news shook the entire family. Determined to fight alongside him, Mary supported her husband through 8 months of treatment and declining health. Although James received extensive medical care, his condition worsened rapidly. By the time his illness was detected, treatment options were limited. Any therapy could only prolong the inevitable. In April 2012, after a difficult battle, James Tench passed away. During this painful period, the whole family came together to support one another. Even Jimmy, who had already moved out, returned home. Mary knew that despite her grief, she now had to shoulder full responsibility for her children's emotional well-being, a role she embraced with steadfast dedication. Mary was highly respected in her community. She worked as a nursing assistant and also volunteered at a care facility for the elderly. Much of her free time was spent with her children, grandchildren, and siblings. She also maintained a large circle of friends, met with them regularly. Despite her own heartbreak, vulnerability following her husband's death, Mary continued to be a source of strength and comfort to the people around her. November 11, 2013, began like any ordinary workday. Mary reported for her evening shift, working from 3:00 p.m. until 11:00 p.m. at a nursing home roughly a 15-minute drive from her house. As usual, she left the facility at the end of her shift, got into her vehicle, and was expected to head straight home. She had no other plans that night, but she never returned. In the early hours of November 12, her son Jimmy called emergency services. He explained that his 55-year-old mother should have arrived home many hours earlier, but had not appeared. The drive from work to home should have taken no more than 15 minutes. Growing increasingly anxious, Jimmy tried repeatedly to reach her. What terrified him most was that Mary never answered, not even once, something completely out of character for her. After reporting his mother missing, Jimmy contacted the Ohio State Highway Patrol to ask whether any accidents had occurred along her normal route. When he learned that no crash had been reported, his worry deepened. By the following morning, Mary was still missing, and no one could reach her. Jimmy went to the Brunswick Police Department and filed a missing person report, visibly distressed. Several more hours passed. Then, around midday on November 12, the police station received a troubling call. Employees at a business in the Brunswick Industrial Park reported spotting a suspicious silver SUV abandoned in an open field. The car had been sitting untouched since morning, its presence clearly out of place. Concerned, they contacted law enforcement. When police arrived, they immediately noticed that the vehicle was undamaged. However, the tire tracks in the soft earth looked unusual, as if the driver had inexplicably steered off the road, stopped in the field, and simply walked away. A license plate check confirmed the vehicle belonged to Mary Tench, and she was in the back seat. The 55-year-old woman was dead. She had been savagely beaten, her hands bound with duct tape. Additional pieces of duct tape were found wrapped around her legs. Inside the vehicle, blood spatter covered multiple surfaces, yet none was found on the ground outside, suggesting the attack happened elsewhere before the car was moved to the field to mislead investigators. The autopsy revealed that Mary had suffered at least 18 blows to the head and neck. The force of the assault had fractured her skull, causing fatal bleeding in the brain. She died within minutes. She had not been abuse-assaulted, but tire marks were visible on her body. The autopsy confirmed she had been run over with her own vehicle, and her DNA was found embedded in the tire treads. A trail of footprints led from the SUV toward the roadway. Investigators made casts of the prints. All came from a single pair of shoes. An initial inspection suggested nothing had been stolen from the car, but further examination showed that cash and credit cards were missing from her purse. Her death certificate listed the cause of death as severe blunt force trauma to the head. Although the scene could have been interpreted as a robbery gone wrong, the brutality of the attack suggested something far more personal. The prolonged beating pointed to rage, intense, targeted, and emotional. Investigators believed the killer likely knew Mary well and harbored deep resentment, jealousy, or a long-standing grudge. But interviews with relatives, co-workers, and friends revealed Mary had no known interpersonal conflicts. She was gentle, friendly, well-liked. She wasn't involved in romantic disputes, had no debts. There was no obvious motive for anyone to wish her harm. Among the first to be questioned was Jimmy, the same son who had reported her missing hours earlier. Police went to his home. Although the young man denied involvement, his behavior immediately struck detectives as odd and only heightened their suspicions. He did not appear distraught or grief-stricken. Investigators quickly pulled his phone records and discovered something concerning. Despite his claim that he tried calling his mother multiple times, he had not called her at all for several days. During this initial meeting, a detective also noticed Jimmy's shoes. They were covered in dirt and dark red stains, highly unusual in a town where nearly everything was paved in asphalt. Jimmy tried to cooperate, acting polite, but his visible nervousness betrayed him. His answers were slow, hesitant, inconsistent. When questioned about the missing phone calls and why they did not appear on his call log, he struggled to offer any explanation. Police also met with Jennifer, Mary's daughter, who was devastated by the loss of her mother and shared several troubling details about her brother. Following their first interaction with Jimmy, investigators' suspicions grew stronger. Law enforcement quickly sought a warrant to search his home and vehicle, worried he might destroy or conceal evidence if they waited too long. When detectives returned to the house, Jimmy had made no attempt to hide anything. They seized the suspicious pair of shoes for forensic testing. Blood traces were found both inside and outside the Tench home. Jimmy initially had no explanation, but later claimed the blood came from a nosebleed. Duct tape was discovered in his bedroom, the same type used to bind Mary's hands and legs. Investigators were not concerned about him fleeing. Jimmy was already a suspect in an unrelated case involving a robbery at a nearby restaurant. While he remained in custody and continued answering questions regarding his mother's murder, detectives expanded their investigation, interviewing Mary's co-workers, friends, and relatives to piece together the final hours of her life. Several witnesses came forward, stating that Jimmy had begun mistreating his mother after his father's death. Multiple people recalled hearing Mary complain about his behavior on several occasions. Mary initially tried to explain it away as a phase, rebellion, growing pains, or her son's way of coping with grief. But as these stories accumulated, it became clear that Jimmy's actions reflected not immaturity, but a deep resentment that had been building for years. Jennifer Tench told investigators that her mother frequently called her in tears, upset over Jimmy's latest outburst. Jennifer repeatedly urged Mary to report the domestic abuse to police, warning that Jimmy's behavior would only grow worse. She told detectives that most of the tension between Jimmy and Mary revolved around money. Jimmy rarely held a steady job and showed little ambition to build a career or a stable life. His interests seemed limited to entertainment, heavy drinking, and banned substances use, with no intention of working to support his habits. He survived on occasional odd jobs. Even before the restaurant robbery, many suspected he was involved in other criminal activity. Mary had tried to rein in his addictions and help him get control of his life, but her efforts only fueled clashes and constant arguments. When forensic analysis was completed, it revealed that the blood found in the Tench home belonged to Mary, disproving Jimmy's claim that the stains came from a nosebleed. His lies unraveled further once investigators examined Mary's credit card records. Her cards had been used multiple times after her death, and ATM surveillance footage showed Jimmy boldly using them. Investigators also discovered that Jimmy had recently begun dating a woman named Christina Kiker shortly before the murder. When detectives questioned her, she confirmed their suspicions. Jimmy needed money to buy expensive gifts for Christina. Since he wasn't working but wanted to impress her, he began using Mary's credit cards. At first, it did so quietly. But as the debt grew, Mary noticed and tried to put a stop to it, triggering Jimmy's anger. Christina recalled that Mary had tried to confront Jimmy during breakfast in October 2013, but he refused to explain himself, becoming aggressive and demanding that she drop the subject entirely. Jimmy seemed convinced he had the right to use his mother's money however he wished. By reviewing the timeline, investigators believe this was the period when the relationship between mother and son deteriorated rapidly. Mary's co-workers reported that she often came to work in tears, distressed about Jimmy, and increasingly overwhelmed. Still, she continued making excuses for him. He had briefly worked at a fast food restaurant, where former colleagues remembered him speaking negatively about his mother. When Mary finally tried to stop his continuous theft from her account, their arguments escalated from shouting to direct threats. Shortly before her death, Jimmy had made disturbing remarks about co-workers, even expressing fantasies about their deaths. But no one took his comments seriously at the time. Alongside witness testimony, the physical evidence overwhelming pointed to Jimmy as the killer. According to the lab report, the dark stains on his shoes and inside the home were Mary's blood. The sole pattern of his shoes matched the footprints found near the abandoned car, and inside the house, prints made in his mother's blood. Numerous bloodstains belonging to Mary were discovered throughout the residence, and on Jimmy's belongings. When questioned again, Jimmy insisted that he had only been helping Mary when she suffered a nosebleed. This explanation collapsed immediately. The sheer amount of blood found in the home was far more than could ever result from a nosebleed. As a result, he was charged with 3 additional offenses related to the murder, including aggravating circumstances such as robbery and kidnapping. Investigators also found correspondence suggesting Jimmy had promised to cover Mary's rent, along with a forged check for $13,000, never cashed, but indicative of his worsening financial desperation. Meanwhile, the separate investigation into Jimmy's involvement in a restaurant robbery was still ongoing. He eventually pleaded guilty in that case and received a 5-year prison sentence. He was incarcerated until his trial for Mary's murder began on February 22, 2016. By the time the trial began, the prosecution had carefully reconstructed the timeline of events, arguing that Jimmy had beaten his mother to death, placed her body in the SUV, and driven it to a remote industrial area. Circumstantial evidence suggested he may have attempted to set the vehicle on fire, but was unable to follow through. In court, the jury was presented with overwhelming evidence, including bloodstains and shoe prints that matched Jimmy's footwear. His defense attorney attempted to argue that Mary had been kidnapped by multiple assailants as she returned home from work. The lawyer emphasized that no neighbors had witnessed an attack and insisted the case was based solely on circumstantial evidence. However, this theory collapsed when confronted with the extensive blood evidence found inside both the house and the car, evidence that pointed unmistakably to Jimmy. The defense offered no physical proof or supporting witnesses to back their claim. The few people who testified on Jimmy's behalf did little to sway the jury. One of the most significant witnesses was Jennifer Tench, Jimmy's sister, who testified for the prosecution. She expressed long-standing concerns about her brother's emotional detachment from the family and recounted troubling incidents that, in hindsight, seemed like early warning signs. She described a childhood Christmas party where she won a tape recorder and karate class tickets in a raffle. Jimmy won nothing and threw a tantrum. Later that evening, his aggressive behavior alarmed their parents so much that they asked Jennifer to give up her prizes just to calm him down. Though upset, she complied, not yet understanding what her parents feared. Jennifer also testified about a more serious event during Jimmy's school years. Their parents were summoned to the principal's office after a hit list was found in Jimmy's possession, a list naming students he believed deserved to die. These were simply classmates with whom he had conflicts, reflecting his inability to fit in socially. Their father, who owned a gun for protection, dismissed the principal's warnings, and Mary downplayed the incident as well. Looking back, Jennifer believes Jimmy already possessed the potential for violence. As Jimmy grew older, tensions within the family worsened. Money and valuables frequently disappeared. Their father once discovered unauthorized charges on his credit card, later traced to Jimmy. He had been stealing their bank cards and spending the money. Their father considered reporting him to police, but Mary intervened, continuing to protect her son in hopes that he would eventually change. Even before their father's passing, Jennifer had already moved out. Unable to tolerate her brother's behavior, she married, had 3 children, completely distanced herself from Jimmy, who seemed focused only on partying and chasing women. Jimmy worked sporadic jobs and moved between friends' homes, avoiding responsibility. Structure. After their father's death, Jimmy suddenly returned to the family home. Jennifer was convinced he came back simply because the strict parent who held him accountable was no longer there. From that point on, she noticed increasing signs of physical abuse on Mary. Yet Mary always defended her son and refused to discuss the situation. Jennifer remained certain that Jimmy was responsible, but without concrete evidence, and with Mary continually protecting him, she felt powerless to take action. The most painful memory for Jennifer was the phone call on the evening of November 11, 2013. Mary was supposed to look after her grandchildren the next day, a visit she always looked forward to. But when Jennifer called, Mary quietly said she couldn't come and offered no explanation. Her voice was low, secretive, as if she didn't want someone nearby to hear. Mary insisted everything was fine, but Jennifer sensed something was terribly wrong. She didn't know what had happened, but she was certain Jimmy had caused another violent outburst and that her mother was trying to shield him once again. On November 12, 2013, around 2:30 a.m., Jennifer woke up to several missed calls from her brother. When she returned the call, Jimmy told her their mother had not come home from work. Jennifer immediately sensed he was lying. She had spoken to her mother earlier that evening and knew Mary had already returned home. Only a few hours later, she learned that her mother's car had been found several kilometers away. The discovery was devastating. Jennifer not only lost her loving mother, but was forced to confront the horrifying truth about her own brother. The most heartbreaking part was explaining to her children why their grandmother, whom they adored, would never visit again. After listening to both sides, the jury deliberated and announced its decision on March 23, 2016. Jimmy, whose real name is James Tench Jr., was found guilty on all charges: aggravated murder, robbery, and tampering with evidence. On April 25, 2016, the sentencing phase began. The defense asked the court to spare Jimmy's life and impose a prison sentence instead of execution. 30-year-old Jimmy cried in court, pleading for leniency. Despite his emotional appeal, he was sentenced to death. Even then, he continued to insist he was innocent and claimed he had been framed. Jimmy filed multiple appeals, but all were denied. The evidence against him was simply too strong. He took his case to higher courts, but the appeals were dismissed. The original death sentence was upheld. However, Jimmy did manage a small legal victory. The robbery charge was eventually dismissed. Though this had no effect on his final sentence, he remains incarcerated at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution in Ohio, awaiting his execution date. Although he never confessed, investigators concluded that money was the main motive for the murder. After their father's death, Jimmy wanted to gain control of the family's assets, but Mary and Jennifer stood in his way. Some even believed he might have eventually targeted Jennifer as well. For her, Jimmy's incarceration brought profound relief. Following the hearings, Jennifer completely severed contact with her brother. She told reporters multiple times that she would only find peace once Jimmy admitted what he had done or when the sentence was finally carried out. After surviving the trauma, Jennifer and her husband turned their focus to raising their 3 children. They still live near Brunswick, Ohio. Jennifer has stated that she does not plan to attend the execution and has refused to appear at any further court proceedings. She chose to distance herself entirely, saying she wants Jimmy to spend his final moments alone, fully aware of the pain he inflicted upon the people who loved him most. On the morning of November 13, 2024, in Lima, everything went on as usual. In the Santa Anita neighborhood, Shayla Condor slung a pink bag over her shoulder, telling her aunt that she would be back soon. However, by evening, she still did not come to work. Her phone was off. No messages. Shayla had disappeared. A few days later, a foul stench emanated from the apartment of a police sergeant named Darwin. When the door was opened, the horrifying truth emerged. A suitcase under the bed and a plastic bag in the bathroom. Inside was Shayla's dismembered body, but the tragedy was not over. Just a few days later, Darwin was found dead in his hotel room. The body was stiff. The time of death did not match. The records were missing. No weapon, no explanation, only silence. Did Darwin harm himself, or did someone want to silence him? A simple disappearance becomes a national shock. A woman murdered, Dawn Cam, a police officer mysteriously dead, and a cover-up that outrages the nation. The question still remains, how many people know the truth, but still choose to remain silent? Shayla Condor was born on April 7, 1998, in Tarma, a city in Peru's Junín region. She is the eldest daughter of Maximo and Elsa, who later had another daughter. From a young age, Shayla was known for her love of animals and nature. When she became a teenager, her family moved to the Santa Anita neighborhood in Lima, hoping for better opportunities. There, Shayla completed high school and trained as a secretary. She then worked as a cashier for a restaurant owned by her relatives. In her free time, Shayla helped with household chores, especially caring for the animals. On the morning of November 13, 2024, she left home as usual, taking a few personal items and saying goodbye to her aunt. She promised to return soon. That day, she wore a blue blouse, blue jeans, sneakers, and a pink shoulder bag. That evening, Shayla was scheduled to start her shift at the restaurant but did not show up. Her family called her several times, but she did not answer the phone, which was completely out of character for her. Worried, her mother reported the matter to the police, but they refused to take the case, even though under Peruvian law, missing person cases must be investigated. The police also believed that Shayla was an adult and might just be out with her boyfriend. However, her mother, Elsa, sensed something was wrong and went back to look for her daughter herself. Later, a friend of Shayla's found her computer and discovered that the messaging app was still open. The last messages were with a man named Darwin. They discussed Shayla helping him take care of his dog. The messages do not show any romantic relationship. They are merely work-related agreements. Darwin offered to pay in cash and arranged to meet on Wednesday, November 13, at his apartment in the Las Praderas neighborhood of Comas. Although their exchange seemed normal at first, a few details stood out. When Shayla asked to receive the payment by card, Darwin insisted on paying in cash. She also said she could only stay until 4 p.m., but he invited her to stay longer and drink. Concerned, Shayla's family looked into Darwin and discovered he was a 25-year-old police sergeant who worked in the Turna unit, known for undercover and surveillance operations. At that time, he was assigned to the Green Squad, which focused on street crime and banned substance trafficking. The next day, Shayla's family went back to the police and shared everything they had learned about Darwin. Even then, the authorities refused to investigate, claiming the case was outside their jurisdiction. When the family went to the police station in Comas, their complaint was rejected again. Officers even warned them they could face defamation charges if Shayla turned up. The police also denied knowing Darwin personally. Despite this, the family pressed for security camera footage from Darwin's building, but their request was denied. It was only on Friday, November 15, that Elsa managed to get the police to officially record Shayla as missing. A police officer later called Darwin to ask about Shayla. He admitted to seeing her, but said she had left the apartment that same day. On Sunday night, November 17, residents of Darwin's building reported a strong, unpleasant smell coming from his apartment. Police officers soon arrived, accompanied by Elsa. When they entered the apartment, they made a horrifying discovery. Shayla's dismembered remains were found in a suitcase under the bed and in a plastic bag in the bathroom. The scene suggested a carefully planned crime, with Darwin as the main suspect. However, there was no direct evidence in the apartment proving Darwin had been there. In her first public statement, Elsa criticized the police for ignoring her pleas. She believed Shayla might still be alive if officers had acted quickly and searched Darwin's apartment the same day she found her daughter's messages. Later, it was discovered that others had also been in Darwin's apartment after Shayla's visit. The place had been rented for a party held from Friday to Saturday. November 16, police identified those individuals as students from the State Technical University of Maritime Studies. During questioning, the students confirmed they had used the apartment but claimed they noticed nothing unusual. Lacking direct evidence, police released them. Police Commissioner Ronald Nunes, who led the Comas District Police Station and oversaw Shayla's case, testified that he had never met Darwin. This statement was confirmed by other officers at the station, the very same ones who had previously refused to accept Elsa's complaint on the grounds that there were no signs Shayla had been kidnapped or was in danger. As time passed, the investigation grew more complicated, and Shayla's family continued to seek answers. Eventually, residents of the Las Praderas complex told police that disturbing incidents had previously occurred in Darwin's apartment. 3 young women had accused Darwin and 2 other police officers of drugging them with spiked drinks and illegal substances before abusing them. According to the women, the events occurred on January 28, 2023. 3 friends had gone to Darwin's apartment, though only one knew him personally. 2 other members of the Peruvian National Police were also present. The women admitted to drinking alcohol but said it was not excessive. Around midnight, one woman felt ill, and Darwin suggested she rest in another room. A few hours later, another woman said it was time to leave, but one of the officers called her boring and offered her another drink. Darwin prepared the drink, and she accepted. After drinking it, she lost consciousness. When the first two women regained consciousness, they realized something was wrong and fled the apartment. From the street, they called the police. At around 6 o'clock a.m., officers arrived and entered the apartment. Inside, they found the third woman unconscious on Darwin's bed. Darwin claimed she was his friend. During the investigation, the first woman identified one of Darwin's colleagues as the man who assaulted her. The second woman also said she had been abused. The third woman said she could not remember what had happened or who might have touched her. Although criminal charges were filed, forensic tests did not find any physical evidence confirming the abuse. As a result, investigators requested the case's dismissal. Darwin was arrested and spent just over 2 weeks in custody. While prosecutors pushed for his continued detention, the court rejected their request. Ultimately, police leadership suspended Darwin from duty for 6 months. The case files showed that delays in the investigation and disciplinary proceedings allowed him to keep working as a police officer. The 2 other officers implicated in the case were also accused but remained in active service. When Darwin's name resurfaced in the media, the 3 women and those involved in the January 2023 case released a public statement. They emphasized that their case remained unresolved and that justice had yet to be served. One of the women said that if things had gone differently, she could have suffered the same fate as Shayla. She also revealed that Darwin had been involved in other possession. Similar incidents. One of these occurred in March 2024. On that occasion, she agreed to meet him for a walk on the beach, but he convinced her to go back to his apartment, as before. She lost consciousness after drinking something he offered her. When she woke up, she was naked in his bed, with her clothes scattered on the floor. She managed to escape and return home, though she suffered from dizziness and severe headaches for the rest of the day. Feeling ashamed, she did not file a police report. Only after Darwin's name reappeared in the news did she, like other victims, publicly say that he belonged in prison. Although it was still uncertain whether there were more victims, Darwin's pattern of behavior had become clear. Those who knew him agreed that he acted deliberately and with calculation, never impulsively. Growing evidence suggested that Shayla's death had not been an accident. Eventually, her family obtained surveillance footage from the Las Praderas apartment complex. The first recordings showed Shayla entering the building, with Darwin opening the door for her while holding his white dog. Sometime later, the footage captured Shayla again, this time walking through the hallway, carrying the same dog. These were the last known images of her alive. Soon after, Shayla's family lawyer, Aaron Alaman, filed a formal complaint with the Peruvian National Police. He stated that officers had ignored Shayla's mother's pleas and failed to act in a case that clearly showed signs of femicide from the beginning. Meanwhile, Darwin continued to work for the police force, even being assigned to ensure security at the Economic Forum, making it more difficult to monitor him. Eventually, he went into hiding. When this was discovered, Shayla's family's lawyer contacted the Ministry of the Interior and Interpol, requesting an international arrest warrant for him. The case drew widespread attention, and Darwin's photo was distributed across the country. But by then, it was too late. His phone records placed him in the San Juan de Lurigancho district. Police carried out an extensive search, checking more than 20 hotels in the area, but they did not find him. On November 19, 2024, police received an anonymous tip about a man resembling Darwin staying in room 30 of the La Perla Hotel. Officers responded immediately and discovered the body of a young man inside. His neck was tied to a television stand, and he had deep cuts on his wrists. Darwin's identification card and police badge were found nearby, but there was no weapon in the room. The scene appeared suspicious. Hours later, a video emerged on social media, allegedly filmed by the same police officers who discovered Darwin's body and took him to hospital. Around the same time, former Prime Minister Ana Jara publicly questioned the circumstances of Darwin's death. According to the testimony, when the body was discovered, it was completely stiff, indicating that Darwin had been dead for many hours. Therefore, taking him to the hospital was unnecessary. The investigation later confirmed that Darwin had been dead for at least several hours before the police arrived at the scene. However, The police officers claimed that they believed Darwin was still alive and acted to avoid responsibility for his death. Few believed this explanation. Their actions were viewed as a serious breach of protocol. Regulations required them to wait for detectives, and Colonel Ricardo Espinosa, head of the investigations unit, confirmed that protocol had been violated. These inconsistencies led to speculation in the media that Darwin may have been murdered. A later forensic report confirmed that Darwin had died 8 to 10 hours before his body was taken to the clinic. This deepened public suspicion and led the Congress of the Republic of Peru to summon Interior Minister Juan José Santibáñez to testify. Santibáñez stated that the police officers who handled Darwin's case might have neglected their duties. He also pledged to conduct an internal investigation to find out why the main suspect had remained on the force despite numerous complaints. Former Minister of Women's Affairs, Gloria Montenegro, commented that Peru had become a country that permits violence against women. Soon after, new inconsistencies appeared in the case. It was unclear how Darwin had managed to check into the hotel. If he had used his ID, why hadn't the hotel owners contacted the police immediately, given that his face was already widely known? Shayla's family later demanded official confirmation of the young man's identity through DNA testing. They wanted to be certain the body was Darwin's. On November 23, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, the Peruvian National Police came under renewed public pressure. Possibly as a result, Interior Minister Santibáñez ordered that Darwin's body should not receive any honors. He was eventually buried in a private cemetery in Uncu. Later, both police stations that Shayla's family had approached were investigated by Peru's Supreme Public Prosecutor's Office. The station chiefs were required to submit certified copies of the personnel files of all officers on duty during the days when the Condor family tried to file a missing person report for Shayla. On November 24, Minister Santibáñez appeared on a Sunday television program. He admitted that his colleagues had mishandled the situation and announced a joint initiative between the Ministry of the Interior and the Ministry of Women's Affairs, a campaign to train police officers and improve their response to cases of disappearance and violence against women. At the end of November, Shayla's mother, Elsa, made a strong statement expressing her outrage at the complete silence from the Ministry of Women's Affairs. She said that since her daughter's death, she had not received a single phone call or any expression of support. Left to deal with her grief alone, she sought psychological help herself and insisted that her youngest daughter, only 14 years old, also needed therapy. In early December, authorities announced a full investigation into the police officers who refused to take the missing person report and those who violated protocol when discovering Darwin's body. Meanwhile, the lawyer for Shayla's family, Aaron Alaman, said they were considering filing a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. He stressed that the family's goal was not only to hold individuals accountable, but also the entire relevant authorities. Alaman also criticized the police's handling of the case. He pointed out that the luminol test in the apartment where Shayla was killed was conducted 3 days after her body was found, which could have compromised key evidence. Meanwhile, large protests have erupted in the city, demanding justice for Shayla and denouncing the actions of the authorities, who are said to be obstructing the investigation. Women's organizations across social media voiced their distrust of the police. The case had gained so much attention that rumors began circulating online, falsely claiming that Darwin was involved in an organ trafficking network and that Shayla might have been one of the victims. On December 6, the public prosecutor's office released the official autopsy results from the Central Morgue in Lima. The report confirmed that all of Shayla's organs were intact, disproving the organ trafficking rumors. However, it also stated that the exact cause of death could not be determined, sparking a new wave of public concern. Shayla's family learned about the autopsy results from the media instead of being informed directly. The next day, their lawyer issued a new statement accusing the police of mishandling evidence. Alaman highlighted that access to the security camera footage from the apartment complex where Shayla was murdered had been blocked. He said he went to the scene to obtain copies of the recordings, but the district attorney refused to release them to the family or their lawyers. No date had been set for an official review of the footage, which Alaman believed could be critical for reconstructing the events and identifying accomplices. On January 25, 2025, Alaman issued another statement announcing that prosecutors had received a new video that could drastically change the investigation. The footage showed Darwin entering a police station just days before Shayla's body was found. Specifically, on the same day, her mother, Elsa, I tried to file the missing person report. This evidence indicated that the officers who refused to take Elsa's report not only recognized Darwin, but intentionally concealed his presence. It also showed that those same officers had tried to destroy records referring to him. According to Alaman, Darwin should have been arrested immediately the day Elsa contacted the police. Because this did not happen, the officers involved could now face charges for aiding and abetting a crime. The current investigation is divided into three main directions: the murder of Shayla, Wilhelm in Latham, and Raum, the misconduct of the officers, and the allegation that Darwin's death was a case of homicide. The officers who found his body are now facing criminal charges for violating procedures, concealing evidence, and abusing their authority. Although they have not been charged with murder, international arrest warrants have been issued to prevent them from fleeing. Meanwhile, the authorities have begun a police reform program aimed at modernizing the force and dismissing any officers involved in criminal acts. Had these reforms been in place earlier, Darwin would have been removed from the force after the 2023 incident, and Shayla might still be alive today. A dental hygienist gave her married lover a year to leave his wife of 34 years. 11 months later, he and his wife, Bianca, went hunting in Africa. The trip was barely underway when she was found dead in a remote hunting cabin, shot in the chest by a shotgun. At first, it looked like a tragic accident, but as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a chilling question. Was this really a hunting accident or a carefully planned murder stemming? Bianca Rudolph was born on December 4, 1959, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She grew up with her two brothers, Vince and Ralph Fenicio, and later attended the University of Pittsburgh. It was there that she met Lawrence Rudolph, aka Larry, then a dental student. The two fell in love, married, and went on to build a seemingly perfect life together. They had two children, Julian Rudolph and Anna Bianca Rudolph. Larry established a thriving dental practice in Pittsburgh, even starring in television commercials for his specialty, Zeditune Dentistry, a rarity at the time. Bianca initially worked at the practice but later devoted herself to raising their children. By all appearances, the Rudolphs were the picture of success. Julian and Anna Bianca enjoyed a comfortable suburban upbringing. Larry was often described as charismatic and generous, and Bianca was a beloved mother. Bianca and Larry also shared a passion for hunting. Though Bianca had never hunted before meeting Larry, she eventually became a respected international hunter and even served as president of the Safari Club International Pittsburgh chapter. Larry's reputation peaked when he won the prestigious 2007 Weatherby Award, often called the Nobel Prize of trophy hunting, but beneath the polished exterior, dark cracks were forming. By the mid-2000 seconds, Larry's dental partners accused him of embezzling money from their practice. When threatened with legal action, Larry denied wrongdoing but was ultimately forced out. In retaliation, he opened Three Rivers Dental Group, only 500 feet from his former office, and began building his own empire. In 2006, while on a fishing trip in Zambia, Larry claimed that a crocodile attack cost him his left thumb. He told insurance companies he could no longer work as a dentist due to nerve damage and began collecting $30,000 per month in disability benefits. Tax-free. Many who knew him doubted the story, whispering that the so-called accident was fabricated. Lori Miliron, a dental hygienist, had joined Larry's office in 2002. Despite knowing he was married, She began an affair with him that would stretch on for years. According to co-workers, Larry's flirtations in the office were no secret. Dental assistant Marianne Versmessen later remarked that Julian always had someone on the side. As rumors spread, even Larry's standing in the hunting community began to collapse. In 2012, the Safari Club International expelled him after accusations of adultery, dishonesty, and misconduct. They stripped his name from record books and revoked his awards. Larry fought back with a defamation lawsuit and, in May 2016, won a settlement, managing to keep his beloved Weatherby Award. Throughout all this, Bianca defended her husband. In a deposition, she insisted she was not a long-suffering wife. She said, her husband and her have been married 30-some years, happily married. But the cracks were impossible to ignore. To friends and insiders, it was becoming clear that Larry was leading a double life. Then came the ultimatum. According to former office manager Anna Grimley, the relationship between Larry and Lori had turned toxic. By 2015, after years of being the other woman, Lori demanded more. She told Larry that if he didn't leave Bianca within a year, she will end his relationship with him. Grimley recalled that Lori claimed their affair had lasted 15 to 20 years and that she was tired of being in the shadows. She wanted the dental offices sold, the marriage ended, and Larry for herself. What followed was a countdown to tragedy. Anna Grimley, a manager at Three Rivers Dental, later claimed in the Hulu docuseries that Lori Milliron wasn't just having an affair, she wanted a whole new life. She wanted to have whatever she wanted and be able to show it off. She wanted Bianca's life. What she said to Anna is, Larry has a year to get rid of Bianca or she's leaving. The countdown had begun and Larry was under pressure. Outwardly, though, nothing seemed unusual. Larry and Bianca continued their high-end lifestyle, splitting time between travel, real estate investments, and visits to Arizona, where their daughter Anna Bianca was in college. Then came the trip that would change everything. In the fall of 2016, after 34 years of marriage, they returned to Kafue National Park in Zambia. Bianca was the only one hunting, chasing a leopard. Neither knew this safari would be their last together. After nearly 2 weeks, they began packing to head home for a family wedding. But on the morning of October 11, 2016, the quiet camp shattered with a gunshot. Game scout Spencer Kokoma sprinted to their cabin. Inside, he was met with a gruesome sight. When he entered, he was very shocked. Bianca lay in a pool of blood. Her shotgun was nearby, still partly zipped in its case, the barrel torn open by the blast. Larry was kneeling over her, crying. At first, Larry told Kokoma and camp manager Godfrey Nikub that he'd been in the bathroom when the gun went off. But Kokoma, a veteran game scout, immediately spotted problems. He'd personally seen Bianca unload her gun the night before. She never left live ammunition inside. And Larry's explanation shifted quickly. First, he suggested Bianca had killed herself. Later, he claimed it was a tragic accident while she was packing the weapon. Even stranger. Kokoma noticed that Larry was fully dressed when he entered the cabin. Yet, police later reported that Larry said he had been wrapped only in a towel at the time. The story was already unraveling while they still stood over Bianca's body. What followed raised even more red flags. Bianca's body was transported 4 hours away to Lusaka, Zambia's capital, for an autopsy. Despite her being a devout Catholic, Larry immediately insisted on cremation. Less than a week later, he left Africa, without even telling his children their mother was dead. But behind the scenes, a U.S. Embassy official was already suspicious. The official, a former Marine with decades of firearms experience, examined Bianca's body at the funeral home. He photographed the wound and measured it, later estimating the shot had been fired from 5 to 8 feet away, far too distant to be an end. Her own life or accident. When Larry discovered this inspection had taken place, he was livid. He called the consular chief, demanding to know who would have access to the photos and reports. Once again, he floated the claim that Bianca might have killed herself. Meanwhile, Musua Muse, An intelligence officer from Zambia's Wildlife Authority conducted his own review. He noted the shotgun's barrel was far too long for self-infliction, that police had failed to collect fingerprints, and that Larry's tears had dried almost instantly. Even more suspiciously, when asked about the operation of his own shotgun, Larry refused to explain. Musse's instincts told him something wasn't right. He couldn't see any genuine grief in Larry. He saw something in Larry's look and had doubted immediately. This was no accident. Zambian police quickly ruled that Bianca Rudolph's death was nothing more than a tragic hunting accident, an accidental discharge from her shotgun. The case was closed almost as soon as it began. But nearly 8,000 miles away in the United States, questions started surfacing, questions Larry Rudolph wasn't prepared for. Why was Larry, a wealthy Pittsburgh dentist, so quick to cremate his devout Catholic wife? Why was he filing life insurance claims worth almost $5 million just days after her death? And why, within months, was his longtime mistress, Lori Miliron, living openly with him in Arizona, as if Bianca had never existed? At his dental practice, the atmosphere turned eerily silent. Staff recalled being ordered not to mention Bianca's death. No flowers, no condolences, no memorial. Patients who asked about her were brushed off with quick subject changes. Then came something even stranger. New surveillance cameras appeared everywhere in the Offahover patients' chairs, in the lab, even in the staff break room. One assistant remembered leaning over to whisper to a coworker, only to have Rudolph call the front desk from Arizona seconds later, demanding to know why they were whispering. Behind the scenes, whispers were growing louder. Former employee Anna Grimley, unsettled by what she knew of Larry's affair, picked up the phone and called the FBI. To her shock, agents revealed she wasn't the first to come forward. Just days after Bianca's death, one of Bianca's close friends had already contacted investigators, insisting that Bianca would never have chosen cremation and pointing out Larry's history of affairs. As FBI agent dug in, the so-called hunting accident unraveled into a chilling puzzle of lies, greed, and premeditated murder. Federal investigators replicated the scene with the same type of shotgun, ammunition, and case. Running ballistic pattern tests, they concluded that Bianca could not have accidentally shot herself. The wound to her heart showed the gun had been fired from at least 1 to 3 feet away. The weapon hadn't gone off in her hands. It had been aimed at her. Evidence in court would later prove what many already suspected. Larry Rudolph shot his wife through the heart, then staged the scene to look like an accident. But the most explosive evidence was yet to come. Another stunning twist in the case came not from investigators, but from a bartender in Phoenix, Brian Lovelace, who worked at the upscale restaurant Steak 44, testified that one night in the spring of 2020, during a heated argument between Larry Rudolph and his mistress, Lori Miliron, he heard Larry shout, "He killed his wife for her." The words rang out during a break in the music, and Lovelace swore under oath that there was no mistaking what he heard. For prosecutors, it was a bombshell. For Larry's defense, it was nothing more than a comment taken out of context. But time was running out for Larry Rudolph. More than 5 years after Bianca's death, he was arrested in Mexico on December 21, 2021, while on holiday in Cabo with Lori. Just weeks later, Lori herself was indicted for obstruction of justice, perjury, and being an accessory. The two went to trial together in July 2022. Larry's legal team fought to the end, painting the case as circumstantial. He even took the stand, claiming that Bianca's death was a tragic accident, that she had pulled the trigger herself while packing her gun. He told jurors that he and Bianca had lived in an open marriage since 2000 and insisted they were content with that arrangement. But that testimony backfired. Several jurors later admitted they had been undecided until Larry himself spoke. His demeanor, his contradictions, and his implausible explanations convinced them of his guilt. In August 2022, the verdict was given. Larry Rudolph was convicted of the murder of Bianca Rudolph. In August 2023, he was sentenced to life in prison. He also received a 20-year prison sentence for filing a false life insurance claim, which will run concurrently. In addition to the prison sentence, Larry was ordered to repay $4,877,744 in life insurance proceeds he received. Y plus a $2 million fine. He was also ordered to forfeit any assets he acquired as a result of his crimes. This result shows that no matter how much money, fame, or power he has, he is still accountable for his crimes. Ivor U.S. Attorney Cole Finnegan said after Rudolph was sentenced, "The fact that justice was served today was no accident. It was part of the dedicated efforts of public servants who are dedicated to justice. They are grateful to the attorneys, officers, and investigators who contributed to this outcome. However, Rudolph's lawyers maintained their client's innocence after the verdict and said they planned to appeal." Lori Milliron was convicted of accessory, obstruction of justice, and perjury. She received 17 years behind bars. At the sentencing hearing, Judge William J. Martinez said the evidence showed she had encouraged Larry to commit the crime, adding that she appeared without remorse when she heard testimony about the murder and saw photos of the scene, but perhaps the most heartbreaking toll was on Bianca's children. At first, both Anna Bianca and her brother Julian defended their father, even submitting sworn affidavits declaring his innocence. The trial shattered that belief. Julian later admitted he can't stand by that original statement because that was before he saw the evidence in the trial. Nothing could have prepared his for those visuals. Now, when his father calls from prison, Julian rarely picks up. Today, Larry Rudolph, now 70 years old, sits inside the U.S. Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, serving life without parole. Lori Milliron is incarcerated at Federal Correctional Institution Mariana in Florida, with a scheduled release date of April 15, 2036. Bianca set out on what should have been a triumphant safari, but instead, it became her final journey. What began as whispers of an accident unraveled into a web of lies, betrayal, and greed that stretched across continents. But in the end, every deception left a trail. Bianca's death was not only the end of a life, it was the shattering of a family, the unveiling of a man's double life, and the downfall of a carefully crafted facade. Today, Larry sits behind bars, stripped of freedom, while Lori counts down her years in prison. Yet for Bianca's children, no verdict or sentence can erase the image of their mother's final moments. In the wild heart of Africa, Bianca hunted for an animal. Instead, she became the prey of the man who promised to love her for life. Justice has been served, but the shadows of this tragedy will haunt everyone it touched for years to come.
Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Sherry Beasley. On Saturday morning, June 29, 1991, 6-year-old Sherry Beasley woke up before the rest of her family. She put on a pink suit and a sweater and carefully left the bedroom she shared with her younger sister. The girl made breakfast for herself and her sister. Later, she asked her mother if she could go to the nearest store because she really wanted to buy some candy that was located nearby. Her young mother, Carrie Greenhill, had been feeling ill that day and sometimes allowed her daughter to leave the house to make small purchases. This time, Carrie even gave Sherry a list of groceries that needed to be purchased. At 1 p.m., Sherry got on her pink bike and set off on a journey that should have taken no more than half an hour. Another woman and her son went shopping at 1:20 p.m. as well. As they passed the store where Sherry was supposed to go, the woman noticed an abandoned pink bicycle. She recognized it right away because this was a small community where people lived in the area and everyone knew each other. Only Sherry had such a bicycle, which had been a Christmas present for the girl 6 months earlier. The neighbor had never seen Sherry's favorite gift thrown aside so carelessly. Looking around for the girl, she didn't see anyone, which seemed suspicious, but at first, she decided not to panic. Maybe the girl was somewhere nearby. As the woman was returning from the store, she noticed the bicycle without its owner again. This seemed more suspicious, especially since she was familiar with Sherry's mother. She stopped at Carrie's house and informed Carrie about the abandoned bicycle. Carrie became worried, so she immediately went to the indicated place, where she found the bicycle along with a bag containing cash and a grocery list. Some of the items were lying nearby, indicating that the girl had made it to the store and bought the necessary goods, but something had happened on her way back. Carrie glanced around the area but still couldn't find her daughter, so she went to the police. They took the case seriously and immediately began searching for Sherry. By the evening of the same day, news of her disappearance was dominating all the media. Many local residents came out to help and assisted in the search for her. All of this occurred in a quiet suburb of Melbourne called Rosebud, Australia, which at that time had a population of about 5,000 people. It is a place where many people know each other, and there is a very low crime rate. It is located on a peninsula, and rarely do you meet strangers. Many locals do not even lock their doors, and mothers let their children walk unsupervised. It was quiet here until Sherry went missing. Detectives talked to Sherry's mother and her partner. Carrie suspected Sherry's biological father, believing he might have kidnapped Sherry. They had long battled over custody of their daughter, and the man had taken the news of losing custody very badly. However, it was quickly confirmed that during that period, Sherry's father was fishing with friends in another region of the country, which was too far away for him to be involved in Sherry's disappearance. This theory was thus dismissed. Witnesses were found who saw Sherry meet with a little boy and talk to him. At that moment, a blue car drove by, but further developments happened without any witnesses. Shane admitted that he had met Sherry in the very location where the bicycle was found. He confirmed that suddenly, an unknown man drove up to the children, grabbed Sherry, and drove away. The man acted so quickly that Shane didn't even have time to react. Unfortunately, Shane didn't know much about car models and brands. He could only describe it as blue and lacking rear doors, likely a sedan. The police carefully examined the area where Sherry had disappeared and discovered tire tracks that confirmed Shane's story. The investigators continued their work and managed to find several witnesses who saw a similar-looking car with a driver described as a man between 30 and 40 years of age. Unfortunately, that description was also quite vague. Notably, a child was sitting in the passenger seat, and the girl appeared to be crying. Although they were unable to obtain a detailed description of the man, the police now knew the exact make of the kidnapper's car, a blue Toyota Corolla. It was a fairly popular model at that time, and in the area, there were about 700 similar cars registered, so the scale of the work only increased. A witness named Margaret Hobbs approached the site. She is a former law enforcement officer who has spent recent decades conducting rehabilitation therapy for assault-prone criminals in a private setting. Margaret, unsure of where her efforts to help society would lead her, worked as a probation officer for many years. After her dismissal, she became a psychotherapist and organized her own private practice, specializing in therapy with men who had committed abuse crimes. Margaret encountered criminals daily, usually those convicted of minor offenses. In November of 1984, 47-year-old Robert Arthur Selby Lowe was sent to see a specialist for the first time, charged with exposing himself to schoolgirls in a shopping mall and making inappropriate comments. He had a previous conviction for theft. From the start, Margaret noticed that the man was very different from the type of people she usually worked with. He was very polite, looked decent, neat, wore glasses, and had a British accent. For many years, he had worked as a church elder, was a Sunday school teacher, and a sports coach for children. No matter how decent he looked, Margaret figured him out. Despite his respectable appearance, something about him was alarming. After the trial, he received a year of correctional labor for exhibitionism, and then he began to regularly visit Margaret for therapy sessions. Gradually, she uncovered more and more criminal episodes from his past, starting from the time he lived in his homeland, Great Britain. Then, in search of a better life, he moved to New Zealand and later went to Australia. In 1967, he said that he regularly demonstrated himself and derived pleasure from it, especially if the victims were minors. Margaret noticed that he took pride in his dubious past. Margaret even managed to gain his trust. By April 1990, He came to her office and admitted to an accusation of attempted kidnapping of a minor. Robert again insisted that he had done nothing wrong. However, he mentioned that an alarming incident had indeed occurred in the suburbs where he worked at that time. Margaret was already good at getting the truth out of him, and gradually she managed to find out what had happened. He met with schoolgirls with whom he had a stagnant conversation about his dream pony. From their dialogue, it became clear that he could very well have had malicious intent. The next time Robert came, about a month later, he said that he had tried to talk to a 12-year-old girl, but a policeman intervened in their conversation. Now he had a new charge. 2 girls, aged 8 and 10, were standing on the railway platform when Robert approached them and started an indecent conversation, attempting to persuade them toward intimacy. All this was overheard by a patrolman standing nearby, whom Robert did not notice. When the policeman approached, Robert tried to escape and had to be detained, thrown to the ground. Before he turned to Margaret, he asked her for help. Margaret refused to write him a characterization that could be used for defense in court because she was sure of his guilt. However, he threatened to involve the girls so that they would testify against him in court, which could become another trauma for them. It became obvious that Robert felt no remorse for what had happened. He was only trying to save himself, and his crimes were only becoming more dangerous. Margaret asked him not to come to therapy anymore. Previously, she believed she was helping him. However, she now realized that it was only getting worse. He was deriving perverted pleasure from their time together. Robert was angry about this and refused to quit therapy, but Margaret insisted he leave. As a result, he flared up and slammed the door. Later, Margaret agreed to write a characterization, but stated the truth within it. Robert's lawyer decided not to use this document in court, believing it would only harm his client. By November 1990, Robert was found guilty of stalking children, but the punishment turned out to be ridiculous. It was limited to a fine of $100. Knowing this, Margaret was alarmed. She now understood that he could get away with it. Fortunately for her, Robert did not visit Margaret for some time, as she had asked. Margaret was once again driving to her office when the first kidnapping in the Rosebud occurred. A search operation was underway, and by this time, authorities knew that the probable kidnapper was a man about 50 years old who could drive a blue Toyota Corolla. As soon as Margaret heard about it, she immediately thought of Robert Lowe. However, Margaret knew that his wife owned the house in the area where Sherry had gone missing. Of course, this was not enough ground to accuse him of anything, so Margaret dismissed the suspicion and continued her usual life. However, the thought that her former client could be involved in all this did not leave her mind. Margaret continued to monitor the search, which was not progressing, but locals were worried that Sherry had become a victim of an unknown serial killer, whom the media had dubbed Mr. Cruel. As it turned out, this man was credited with numerous crimes in the suburbs of Melbourne in the late 80s and early 90s. He was considered the main suspect in the kidnapping of 13-year-old Carmine Chain, who was abducted from her home about 3 months before Sherry Beasley's disappearance. Her body, with gunshot wounds, was found a year later in Edgar's Creek. Despite a long break, Robert Lowe came to Margaret again. Margaret's son-in-law had organized a law firm on the floor below her office, but he was not there, so Robert decided to talk to her. This time, the conversation was again about the crime of which he was accused. Naturally, according to him, the Supreme Court's decision was unfounded. Margaret immediately noticed that Robert had changed a lot. He looked unkempt and was rude to her. This atypical behavior only increased her suspicions about him. She refused to engage further and then went downstairs to see what kind of car Robert had arrived in. It turned out that he had used a blue Toyota Corolla without rear doors, just as described in the suspect's profile for the kidnapping. Margaret realized that he could indeed be involved in the disappearance of Sherry and contacted the police. It turned out that the police had recently reached his name on the list of cars and were checking him out. Robert matched the description of Sherry's kidnapper quite well in terms of age, appearance, and the make of the car. It was also discovered that Robert had a criminal past concerning harassment of minors, which looked especially suspicious. Then detectives had a conversation with him. Robert appeared too nervous, reluctantly answered questions, but quickly remembered what he did on the day of Sherry's kidnapping. His answers seemed dubious. Now, Margaret was sure of his involvement. The police arrived at Robert's house and took his car away for forensic examination. Robert himself was arrested and taken in for questioning. He was allowed to make one phone call and immediately reached out to Margaret, asking her to recommend the best lawyer she knew. Margaret advised him to stay with the lawyer who had already handled his previous cases. Then, Robert was released due to insufficient evidence. A month later, he came to work looking disheveled and sloppy as usual. According to him, detectives had interrogated him for more than 4 hours, but he refused to provide fingerprints and DNA samples. Without irrefutable evidence against him, the detectives could not proceed without his voluntary permission. However, suspicions against Robert were not unfounded. At the time of Sherry's disappearance, he provided an alibi that no one could confirm. During his communication with the detectives, Robert changed his story several times, which further strengthened the suspicion against him. When they tried to check the alibi, the time periods Robert indicated did not match the statements of witnesses, including his friend, employer, and wife. Even Robert's wife began to notice oddities in his behavior that day. Robert claimed he was not in that area, but several people saw him there. He returned home only in the evening, quickly changed his clothes, and threw his things in the washing machine, which he had never done before. He thoroughly washed his car. Curiously, he now lived in a country house not far from the place of Sherry's abduction. From the first meeting with Margaret, he insisted that he was innocent of Sherry's kidnapping and was sure that the police wouldn't find any evidence against him, allowing him to start a new life. 3 months after Sherry's disappearance, on September 24, 1991, 2 girls were riding horses along a country road about 10 kilometers from Rosebud. They smelled something unpleasant and went to investigate. Inside, the girls saw decomposed remains, but initially mistook them for a kangaroo. The next day, when they passed by again, they realized that scavenger animals had pulled the bones into the open. They then understood that what they saw was not an animal, but rather the remains of a small person who was wearing a pink tracksuit, matching the items of clothing that Sherry Beasley had been described as wearing. The girls went to the police and reported their frightening find. Forensic examination identified the remains as belonging to the missing 6-year-old girl, Sherry. During this period, Robert Lowe became a regular customer of Margaret. When she heard that the child's body had been found, she spoke to him about it. He clearly became nervous and inappropriately added that he had no idea where the body could have been found, even though Margaret did not ask him about it. She noticed that her client's behavior became increasingly erratic with each meeting, he more nervous each time. During this period, Margaret became convinced that Robert was responsible for the crime. It felt like a game of cat and mouse. Margaret knew that Robert would deny his guilt to the last. However, he liked to talk about what happened, and gradually, he revealed more and more details that he could not have known. Robert's house was searched. He was brought in for questioning several times, during which the suspect insisted that he was not guilty and had an alibi. Robert was under surveillance. It was found that he often visited public places where he watched girls and satisfied himself. Newspaper clippings and articles related to the kidnappings of Carmine Chain and other girls were found in his house. He did not just collect them but also made strange notes. All of this resembled some kind of madness, which was even confirmed by his wife. According to her, he talked about it so often while they were still living together that she was forced to ask him to stop. Now, she was determined to get a divorce. Finally, 2 detectives visited Margaret Hobbs and reported that they were investigating Robert's case, his probable involvement in the murder of Sherry Beasley. At that time, they still had no evidence. Additionally, Margaret did not want to violate medical ethics and disclose details of her therapy sessions with Robert. However, she began to doubt, realizing that he bore a striking resemblance to the real criminal. The detectives decided to act discreetly and secretly from Margaret. They installed a small microphone above the office, allowing them to listen to all of Robert Lowe's visits. Investigators were in the next building, eavesdropping on his revelations. One time Robert came in for therapy, he mentioned that he might know where the body was found, as one day he and his wife were walking there. Then, Margaret asked him to point to the location on a map. A stroke marked the location. Margaret checked and found that this mark precisely coincided with where the body of Sherry had been discovered. It seemed that this could not have been a mere coincidence. During the next visit, Robert entered the office and suddenly began to talk about how the child's body might have been eaten by insect larvae. This struck Margaret as inappropriate and alarming. She saw a small foreign object. Margaret quickly realized it was a larva. In anger, Margaret demanded he leave the office. Robert complied, leaving behind the plastic bag with which he had come. When Margaret looked inside, she found it was filled with larvae. By March 1992, Robert came to see Margaret again. At their meeting, he stated that he was inclined to block memories of the terrible deeds he had committed, to the extent that he truly could not remember anything. Margaret asked if this could be connected with the death of Sherry Beasley. He admitted that it indeed could be the case. However, he was more worried about the divorce, which he was struggling with. Robert continued to talk but did not say anything specific until April 1, 1992, when he finally told Margaret that he wanted to tell the truth. She agreed to help, after which he began his story. Robert said, on June 29, 1991, he was driving along the road when he noticed two children arguing on the street. It was Sherry and her friend, Shane. He stopped and offered Sherry a ride to avoid the conflict. She agreed, sat in the passenger seat, and buckled up. As he drove away, Sherry suddenly began to choke. She looked scared and panicked. By the time Robert stopped, the girl had stopped breathing. He checked her pulse and realized that she had died. His first thought was to dig a grave to dispose of the body. However, he didn't have a shovel. Robert wanted to take Margaret to where he left Sherry's body. Margaret was horrified but determined to obtain a complete confession, so she agreed but requested a couple of hours to prepare and settle some business. When Robert Lowe made his confession, the police were informed. Margaret was deeply concerned about the implications for professional ethics, but she understood that she was doing the right thing. A trip with the main suspect was scheduled for the same day, and the police offered to assist in catching a dangerous killer. They were going to accompany Margaret along with the criminal, but secretly, in order to get a confession without scaring him off. Margaret was given a special device with a panic button that she was supposed to press if she suddenly felt in danger. In addition, a hidden listening device was installed in the car. On the evening of the same day, Robert and Margaret headed to Rosebud. First, Robert decided to stop where a small pink bicycle had been found. He pointed out exactly where they had arrived, which was marked with a yellow ribbon tied to a tree that someone had left in memory of Sherry. Then they walked to the drain pipe where the body was found. Here, mourners had left flowers, organizing a semblance of a memorial. Robert told Margaret the story of Sherry Beasley, wiped his tears with his sleeve, prayed for his salvation, and offered Margaret to come in for a cup of tea, but she refused, left. Margaret felt unwell and stopped a couple of 100 meters away, where she threw up from the horror she experienced. After this, she expressed a desire to cooperate even more closely with the police to catch this dangerous man. Detectives collected all the necessary evidence, and by May 1993, Robert Lowe was arrested in the suburbs of Melbourne. He refused to cooperate and said that he was as pure as Jesus Christ. Therefore, detectives had to talk to his lawyer. Lowe's concept of guilt was useless because his confession had been recorded when he was brought to court. He was met by a crowd of journalists and angry members of the local community, including Sherry's mother. She wanted to pounce on him, but others held her back. It was believed that Robert was lying, claiming that Sherry had voluntarily gotten into the car. This contradicted the words of Shane's friend, who insisted that they had not quarreled and that the man had simply dragged Sherry into the car by force. Additionally, they did not believe that she had accidentally suffocated herself during a panic attack. Unfortunately, Sherry's body was found too late, making it difficult to establish the exact circumstances. Although he was in prison, new details of the crime emerged thanks to the testimony of a cellmate. However, these details needed to be checked and confirmed before the jury. His story about the killer was questioned, Robert, so the cellmate was offered to wear a wiretap to elicit more information. A legend was invented, according to which the cellmate had a good lawyer who could help Robert, but to do so, he needed to know exactly what happened. This story looked plausible, and the cellmate managed to convince him. Robert told a new, more convincing version of events, which is now considered final. He reported that he had watched Sherry for quite a long time and discovered that the little girl periodically went shopping alone. He kidnapped her, taking advantage of this, and brutally abused her. After that, he strangled her with his hands. Robert disposed of the body by throwing it down the drain and discarded the clothes because they had too many traces of his DNA on them. The trial of Robert Arthur Selby Lowe began in October 1994, with Margaret Hobbs becoming the prosecution's star witness and testifying for 4 days. His cellmate expressed gratitude to the detectives who allowed him to put a dangerous child killer behind bars. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and found Robert guilty of kidnapping and murdering Sherry Beasley. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for first-degree murder and an additional 15 years for kidnapping. Margaret's cooperation with the police was considered a controversial decision. People were divided into 2 camps. Some regarded her as virtuous for allowing a dangerous criminal to be put behind bars, while others accused her of failing to maintain the confidentiality of her client, which appeared unprofessional. In 1997, Robert appealed, arguing that Margaret should not have been a witness in the case, but this appeal was rejected. This story left an indelible mark on Margaret's soul, and she began writing a book. In 1996, she and her husband died in a car accident. The work on this book was completed by journalist and writer Andrew Rule. In 2021, Robert Arthur Selby Lowe, 84, died at Hopkins Correctional Center near Ararat in Western Victoria. The tragic fate of Sherry Beasley serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of innocence and the hidden dangers that can lurk even in the quietest of communities. What began as a simple errand on a peaceful Saturday morning spiraled into a nightmare that shattered the lives of her family and left an indelible scar on Rosebud. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Valerie Pride. Valerie Pride was born on March 9, 1958, and grew up in Arizona with her 5 brothers and 1 sister, which contributed to her strong and determined character. She attended South Mountain High School, where she gained a reputation for her intelligence and ambition. After graduating, she aimed to continue her education at Arizona State University, driven to create a better future for herself. During her high school years, Valerie fell in love with a young man named Jimmy Pride. Their romance flourished, and in 1974, they got married. Just a year later, they welcomed their first daughter, Shansha. In 1977, their family expanded again with the birth of their second daughter, Duana. Despite being a young mother, Valerie continued to pursue her ambitions. She aspired to become an electrician, a profession that was predominantly male at the time, and she did not let anything stand in her way. By the time Duana was born, Valerie had been accepted into a job training program sponsored by the United Electrical Workers, a rare and competitive opportunity. She made history by becoming the first black female electrician at the Palo Verde nuclear plant, all while caring for her 2 young children. Her life was a delicate balance of motherhood, work, and being a trailblazer in her industry. However, Valerie faced challenges in her personal life as well. Her marriage to Jimmy eventually ended in divorce. Even so, she remained strong, focusing on her career and her children, and trying to give them the best life possible. After the divorce, Valerie found new love with Ben Daniels, a co-worker at the nuclear power plant. Ben also had children from a previous marriage, and as their relationship deepened, they began planning for their future together. Although they appear perfect on the outside, their relationship is actually unstable. Valerie's sister, Vicki McDonald, revealed that Ben's past was negatively affecting their relationship. Vicki mentioned that Ben would often reassure Valerie that he had everything under control. Despite these issues, Valerie maintained her faith in Ben and their future, and before long, the two took a big step forward in their relationship together. In 1982, Valerie and Ben decided to purchase a new home in a quiet area of South Phoenix, Arizona. This marked a significant milestone in their lives. They selected a newly constructed Spanish-style home, imagining it as a place for a new beginning. Meanwhile, Valerie was finishing her final year of training to become an electrician, nearing a career breakthrough. After her divorce, she had found love again, and now they had a new home to create memories with their daughters. Everything seemed to be going very well. Sometimes, life's most promising moments can disappear in an instant. Just weeks after moving into their new home, tragedy struck unexpectedly. Labor Day weekend in 1982 began like any other for Valerie and her daughters. It was meant to be a time for relaxation, family bonding, and simple pleasures. But on Monday, September 6th, what started as a normal day turned horrific. At around 4 p.m., Ben received a call that no parent ever wants to hear. His 9-year-old daughter from a previous relationship had had an epileptic seizure while bathing. Her mother was with her but had stepped out for a minute. In that short time, the little girl suffered a seizure and submerged underwater. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors battled to save her, but by the time Ben arrived, it was too late. His daughter had been pronounced dead. While Ben was at the hospital dealing with an unimaginable loss, Valerie and her daughters were at home, completely unaware of the situation. In a time before cell phones, Valerie had no quick way to contact Ben or find out what was happening, so she had to wait for him to call her. Around 9:30 that evening, Valerie spoke on the phone with Ben's brother. This call became her last known contact with anyone outside her home. They spoke for about 10 minutes, focusing on the condition of Ben's daughter in the hospital. During the conversation, there was a knock on the front door of Valerie's house. She informed Ben's brother that she needed to hang up to answer the door, as Ben was not home. That was the last time anyone heard from her. Neither she nor Ben's brother realized that this would be their final conversation. At around 10 p.m., after several hours in the hospital, Ben returned home, exhausted and grieving the loss of his daughter. He just wanted to get some rest. However, as he neared his house, he noticed something was wrong. The front door was slightly ajar, which was unusual, especially in the Arizona summer when everyone kept their doors closed to maintain cool air indoors. Ben carefully pushed the door open and stepped inside, where he saw a horrifying sight: blood everywhere. Valerie and her 2 daughters, Shansha and Duana, had been murdered. They had been brutally attacked in the living room, just a few feet apart. 8-year-old Shantia and 4-year-old Duana lay lifeless in the living room, their small bodies covered in blood. Valerie was also found dead near the kitchen, her body soaked in blood. The home they had just moved into, where they hoped to start anew, had turned into a scene of unimaginable violence. Ben's screams echoed through the night. Overwhelmed with grief, he collapsed, crying out so loudly that neighbors rushed outside to see what was happening. Unable to help, the neighbors called the police, as Ben was too devastated to do anything but mourn. For any parent, losing a child is an indescribable pain, but returning home to find one's entire family slaughtered is simply beyond comprehension. When the police arrived, even the most experienced officers struggled to comprehend the scene before them. Many described it as the most horrific crime scene they had ever encountered. Blood was everywhere, covering the floors and walls. Shansha and Duana were discovered huddled together in the living room near a love seat, still in their pajamas, which suggested that they were preparing for bed when the attack occurred. Valerie was found in the dining area close to the kitchen, her body just a few feet from the back door, as if she had been trying to escape. There were no signs of forced entry at the crime scene, indicating that the killer either had permission to enter or managed to get in without breaking anything. The police began to consider a disturbing possibility when they learned about a knock at the door during Valerie's last phone call. The person who knocked might have been the one responsible for the horrific crime. Furthermore, it was revealed that the suspect had not stayed in the house after the murders. They exited through the back door and jumped over the fence, vanishing into the night. The murders were initially believed to be the result of a robbery gone wrong, but that theory was quickly dismissed. There were no signs of forced entry, no stolen items, and no evidence of an intruder. Instead, they discovered a scene of shocking violence. Someone had entered the home with the singular purpose of committing murder. The pressing question for investigators was, who would want to kill a young mother and her children in such a brutal manner? Time was critical, as a dangerous killer was still on the loose, and they needed to apprehend him before he could strike again. That night, the neighborhood was quiet, but one person had noticed something unusual. As police officers searched the area, a neighbor mentioned hearing a loud argument coming from Valerie's home around 9:45 p.m., but thought it was just a typical family disagreement. When they looked outside, they saw nothing, no suspicious individuals, no signs of trouble, and nothing that seemed alarming. An hour later, at 11 p.m., Valerie's ex-husband, Jimmy Pride, arrived at the house. When the officers informed him that his daughters had been murdered, he collapsed on the pavement, screaming in anguish, just like Ben had. He couldn't contain his emotions, writhing in pain and sobbing. The anguish was so intense that the police had to intervene by force to calm him down. Meanwhile, behind the house, there was a bloody handprint on the wooden fence. This was clear evidence that the murderer had escaped by climbing over the fence and disappearing into the darkness, likely through the yard of a nearby abandoned home. But whose handprint was it, and what kind of person could commit such a brutal act? The investigation took a more disturbing turn when detectives learned that Valerie's family had only recently moved into the neighborhood. They had been there for just a few weeks, barely enough time to make friends, let alone enemies. No one truly knew them, yet someone wanted them dead. Detectives searched for answers by examining Valerie's life. They investigated her social relationships, her family, and sought any signs of a possible enemy. However, as they delved deeper, the truth became increasingly troubling. There was nothing to uncover. Valerie had no history of conflict, no long-standing grudges, and no background suggesting that she would meet a violent end. She was a devoted mother and lived an ordinary life. Yet, someone had violently disrupted that life in a horrific manner. Autopsies revealed that both Valerie and her two daughters, Shansha and Duana, had been attacked multiple times. Notably, there was no evidence of abuse, which eliminated one possible motive, but it did not bring them any closer to solving the case. With each passing day, the investigation stalled, unanswered questions continued to accumulate, and the town was left in a state of fear. On September 10, 1982, Valerie and her daughters were buried, but their funerals were filled with tension. The community was haunted by the reality that a killer remained at large. Detectives then discovered an unusual clue. A month before the murders, Valerie and Ben's home had been broken into. Initially, it appeared to be a simple burglary, but the details were alarming. The intruder rummaged through the house and also slashed their water bed. Disturbingly, they took Valerie's clothes and tossed them into the water, indicating a personal motive. It was clear that this was not a simple thief looking for valuables, but rather an enemy who wanted to send a message. Could this have been a threat? Did Valerie unknowingly encounter someone dangerous? Investigators were eager to find connections, but the case hit another dead end. The culprit had disappeared without a trace. As months went by, what seemed like promising leads faded away. Numerous tips came in, each one offering the possibility of a breakthrough, but none brought the detectives any closer to solving the case. What once felt urgent was now growing cold. As the situation became tense, rumors began to spread throughout the town, accompanied by various theories, such as ghosts in the night. One particularly chilling theory suggested that the recent murders were linked to the tragic death of Ben's daughter. Some residents speculated that Valerie and her daughters were murdered as a twisted form of revenge. Ben's 9-year-old daughter had died in an accident, leading some to believe that someone held Valerie responsible for it. However, investigators later clarified that the girl had suffered an epileptic seizure and had drowned, with the autopsy confirming that there was no foul play involved. Despite this, rumors continued to thrive, contributing to the growing anxiety in the town. As the one-year anniversary of the murders approaches, detectives have not yet found any new leads. The murders of Valerie and her daughters shocked the community, and investigators are still searching for information, but to no avail. Valerie's union and the Silent Witness program have offered a $2,000 reward, yet no significant evidence has been uncovered so far. In August 1983, the case took an unexpected turn. Police announced that a suspect had been arrested, and the news quickly spread throughout the town, raising hopes that justice would be served. What surprised everyone, however, was that the suspect was only 14 years old and still a high school student. Authorities also disclosed that they were searching for two other suspects, one juvenile and one adult, believed to be involved in the murders. The police suspected that the murder might have been an act of revenge for the death of Ben's daughter, a theory that had been discussed but never confirmed. The arrested teenager was believed to be related to Ben's daughter. Could Valerie have been blamed for the child's death? Was there a deep-seated resentment that led to something violent? This idea was frightening, but it raised more questions than it answered. If Ben's daughter's death was considered an accident, why would anyone blame Valerie for it? And if the motive was revenge, why target her daughters as well? It was confusing, and even the investigators were skeptical. Just when it seemed that a motive had been identified, the case became more complicated. Within 24 hours of the arrest, the 14-year-old was released. The district attorney decided not to file charges, stating that more investigation was necessary. The evidence the detectives had was not strong enough to support a case in court. Two other potential suspects were never arrested, no charges, no answers. The case, which had briefly reignited interest, went cold again. 2 years later, a neighbor found a surprising clue, a knife buried in a backyard. It closely resembled the one thought to have been used in the murders. Investigators quickly sent it to the crime lab, hoping it might finally provide a breakthrough. But once again, optimism turned into disappointment. The knife was tested for DNA, but there were no matches, no evidence linking it to Valerie, Shansha, or Duana. It was yet another dead end in a case that continued to be a mystery. As the years passed, the detectives never gave up on the case. They meticulously reviewed every piece of evidence, interviewed over 1,000 people, and followed every lead, but they still couldn't identify the killer or their motive. By 2012, investigators admitted that they had exhausted all possibilities and needed the public's help, believing that someone had vital information. They were convinced that this was a deeply personal crime. The perpetrator had entered Valerie's family home with the sole intention of committing murder. Now, more than 40 years later, the case remains unsolved. The brutal murders of Valerie, Shansha, and Duana continue to haunt the community, leaving an emotional scar that won't heal. Investigators think that someone close to Valerie might hold the key to the truth. But how could someone capable of such brutality carry on as if nothing had happened? Do they feel remorse? Do they ever worry about being caught? Or have they convinced themselves that they got away with murder? In recent years, advancements in forensic technology have allowed detectives to revisit the evidence. DNA collected from the crime scene has been submitted to a national database, raising hopes for a breakthrough. However, even if the killer is eventually identified, no explanation will ever make sense. Nothing can justify the horrific act of killing an innocent mother and her two young daughters. This crime epitomizes senseless violence. Valerie, Shansha, and Duana did not deserve what happened to them. Regardless of how much time has passed, one thing is clear: those capable of such a terrible act must be held accountable. Valerie Pride's life was a testament to resilience, ambition, and a profound love for her two daughters, Shansha and Duana. She was determined to pursue a stellar career as the first Black electrician at the Palo Verde nuclear power plant and to build a new life with Ben Daniels in South Phoenix. However, on Labor Day weekend in 1982, her family's dreams and future were brutally snatched away in a horrific act of violence. More than 40 years later, the mystery of who killed them and why remains unsolved, leaving a lasting pain in the community. Despite advances in forensic science, nothing can erase the tragedy that claimed the lives of an innocent mother and her two young daughters.